You learn a new word. Maybe it's apnea, maybe sizzy, or just a car brand that you had never seen before. The moment it enters your consciousness, it multiplies. You see it in an article the next morning. It appears in the lyrics of song. A stranger says it aloud in the supermarket queue. Suddenly, that idea previously unknown to you is everywhere. You feel that you have unlocked a hidden pattern in the universe. But the truth is much less magical and much more disturbing. This is the BM Hoff phenomenon, the illusion of frequency. The mind's dirty trick of making something seem common just because it has been noticed once. But it is not a failure. It is a characteristic, a survival mechanism hidden in the machinery of attention. Your brain does not record the world equally. It filters it. Most of what you see is discarded before reaching memory. You would go crazy if you processed everything. So your mind looks for relevance, patterns, threats. The moment something is singled out as significant, the hunt begins. And that hunt changes everything. The same world is still there, but now it is highlighted, tracked, underlined in neon. What has changed has not been the world. It has been you. This change is subtle, almost invisible. You do not realize the moment when your brain decides that it cares. You only notice the consequences, the sudden explosion of a word, a face, a song. You think it is out there, but it is here. And once you realize it, it is scarier. Because if your brain can rewrite reality without asking how many other discoveries are just echoes of your own attention bouncing off you. The BM Hoff phenomenon is not about repetition. It is about awareness. You do not see something more because it happens more. You see it more because you have started looking for it, but you do not feel that you are looking for it. That is what makes it insidious. It disguises the subjective approach as objective truth. You think the world is changing, but it is your perception that has been hijacked. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Once something becomes visible, it begins to seem important. Relevance becomes urgency. Your mind begins to assign meaning. And at that moment, a loop begins. You notice something, so you notice it more. You notice it more, so you assume it is everywhere. And since it is everywhere, it must mean something. It must be a sign. This is how coincidences become omens. How suspicion becomes paranoia. How attention becomes obsession. Let's give an example. You see a documentary about surveillance cameras, data collection, the illusion of privacy. It disturbs you. The next day, you realize how many cameras there are in your city, at each intersection, in each building, in your own telephone. You had never seen them before. Now you can't stop seeing them. You tell yourself that surveillance has increased overnight, but that is not so. You have simply realized, and that awareness has reprogrammed your perception of the security of the control of reality itself. This is the Bedtime loop. Once inside, you cannot distinguish if a signal is real or if you're just the antenna. And most people never realize that they are transmitting their own fears back to themselves. Now, imagine applying this to people. They deceive you, they lie to you, they betray you. You tell yourself that it is an anomaly, something specific. But then you see it again in a friend's relationship, on a television show, in a meme. You start to notice signs everywhere. Mocking smiles, pauses, glances that linger too long. Suddenly, everyone seems suspicious, not because they are, but because you're now tuned to the frequency of distrust and it keeps transmitting. Or let's take a more innocent example. You find out about a disease you had never heard of, ALS, lupus, a rare blood disorder, and in the following days you start to see it everywhere. An old article resurfaces. A celebrity mentions it. A stranger brings it up. It seems as if the universe were warning you. But it's just your brain connecting dots that have always been there, now magnified through a lens that you didn't ask for, but can't remove. It seems like fate, but it's just filtered noise. And the reason why this matters, the reason why this is not just a curiosity, is because your decisions are shaped by what you think is common. Frequency becomes importance. Prevalence becomes danger. And your actions follow your perceptions. A world that seems full of tragedy makes you withdraw. A world that seems full of success makes you feel like a failure. But neither of the two worlds has changed. Only your sensitivity. In that way, The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon becomes a psychological scam. Your brain presents you with a version of reality tailored to you and never tells you that it is tailored to you. It doesn't ask for your permission. It simply edits. It shows you what it thinks matters and hides what it thinks doesn't matter, and you trust it because it's your own mind. Who else were you going to trust? But that trust is blind because the phenomenon works both ways. Just as noticing something makes it seem common, not noticing something makes it disappear. Entire rays go unnoticed because your mind has not decided that they matter to it. People, patterns, injustices, all filtered because it was not selected. It is not relevant. It is not striking. It is not yours. That is the real scam. It is not that your brain deceives you into seeing things, but that it deceives you into not seeing them, and you don't even know you're blind. So what can you do? First, recognize that your consciousness is not neutral. The world does not advertise fairly. Your mind is biased towards what it has just learned, what it fears, what it expects. Knowing that is the first step to regaining control. Do not trust frequency as evidence. Do not confuse repetition with proof. Learn to pause before assigning meaning, because the safer something seems, the more likely it is that your brain has simply shown it to you twice. Second, resist the urge to find patterns in everything. Pattern recognition is a survival instinct, but in a world overloaded with information, it becomes a disadvantage. The simple fact that something appears 3 times in a week does not mean that is its destiny. It only means that your mind is tuned to it. Ask yourself if it would seem so important if you had not seen it yesterday. And third, be aware of the emotional residue. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon not only alters what you see, it alters how you feel. It can make the world seem crowded, dangerous, prophetic. But those feelings are based on echoes, on reflections, not facts. Learn to separate content from frequency. Learn to breathe between the signals, because in the end, the phenomenon is not the problem. It is only a mechanism. The deception is believing it without questioning. The real trick is to confuse a summary of highlights with a documentary, to confuse your attention with objective truth. And that is why it matters, because your whole vision of the world, what you fear, what you love, what you believe is real, is shaped not by what exists, but by what you perceive. And what you perceive is never neutral. You think you're looking for the truth. You scroll, read, debate, investigate, ask questions. But your brain is not looking for precision. It looks for concordance. Not what is true, but what is familiar to you, what aligns with what you already believe. And when it finds it, it lights up like a Christmas tree. Dopamine, relief, validation. You were right all the time. This is confirmation bias, one of the most insidious psychological deceptions that you carry with you. A bias that not only distorts how you interpret new information, but actively filters out what contradicts you before it reaches consciousness. Like a doorman at the door of your mind, he lets in what agrees and blocks what is not. And it does it so smoothly that you do not even realize it is happening. You think you have weighed the evidence, but the scale was rigged before you started. Imagine you are in a room full of voices, hundreds of opinions, facts, and experiences, and then imagine that your brain turns down the volume of everyone who does not agree with you. Not enough to silence them completely, just enough to make them sound less credible, less relevant, less human. Meanwhile, the voices that echo your opinions are amplified. Their flaws are forgiven. Their logic seems sharper. Their tone seems trustworthy. That is the illusion. This is how you build a vision of the world that seems balanced, but is actually biased. Confirmation bias does not want you to be curious. It wants you to be right. And that is a problem. Because when being right becomes more important than being accurate, the truth becomes optional. You start with a conclusion and work backwards. You select the evidence, ignore the counterexamples, reinterpret contradictions as support. And the worst thing of all is that you think you are being objective. You think you're thinking, but you're only reinforcing. This is not a mere failure. It is integrated into the mind's architecture. A shortcut, a heuristic, a way to reduce the cognitive load, favoring coherence over contradiction. Your brain hates having 2 opposing ideas at once, so it makes a decision, And that decision always favors the path of least resistance, the belief you already hold. You see, in politics, people do not change their minds when shown contrary data. They dig in more. They question the source. They attack the messenger. They close themselves off more because the pain of being wrong, of admitting a mistake, is too sharp. The confirmation bias intervenes to protect the ego, to preserve identity, to protect the fragile idea that I know what. You see, in relationships, you decide that someone is selfish, so every time they forget something, it's more proof. But when they do something kind, you call it luck or manipulation, or simply ignore it. The bias not only colors new information, it rewrites it. It turns kindness into guilt, apology into weakness, nuance into threat, until every action fits the story you already believe. You also see it in science. Researchers unconsciously design experiments that support their hypothesis. They interpret ambiguous results in ways that confirm their assumptions. Even peer-reviewed journals fall victim. Studies with positive results are more likely to be published, creating an echo chamber of evidence built on selective survival. The myth of objectivity collapses under our need to be right. Not even memory is safe. You remember things that support your narrative. You forget the things that don't. You revise, omit, reshape until the past itself agrees with you. And you don't do it on purpose. That's the scary part. You genuinely believe that your version is the truth because it feels right, because it fits. And that feeling, that internal click, is confirmation bias. It turns feeling right into being right. And most of the time, we don't know the difference. It gets worse. In the age of algorithms, confirmation bias has been industrialized. Platforms track what you click, what you like, what you stay on, and feed you more of the same. Not because it's true, but because it keeps you hooked. You fall into a bubble, a loop, a curated illusion where everything agrees with you. You think you have investigated. You haven't. You have just been fed a smarter and faster version of your own reflection. And when you finally encounter a contradiction, something that challenges your beliefs, it doesn't feel enlightening. It feels like an attack, like a betrayal, like someone is trying to break the mirror. You get angry, you get defensive, you discredit the source, you question the motives. You retreat deeper into your echo chamber, convinced now more than ever that you are right and everyone else is blind. That's the trap. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing, explaining away facts that don't fit. Intelligence becomes ammunition for self-deception. You build better arguments, not better beliefs. You're not looking for truth. You build a fortress around the belief you already have and decorate it with data. And so the world fractures, not because people are stupid, but because everyone thinks they are right and that they have evidence to prove it. Then, how do you fight against it? You don't eliminate confirmation bias. You overcome it. You train yourself to notice the feeling of certainty and pause. When something fits too well, challenge it. Ask yourself what would convince you otherwise. Look for disconfirmation, not affirmation. Read the other side, not to destroy it, but to understand it, to let it mold you, even just a little. Ask yourself, what am I not seeing? Ask yourself, how would this look if I were wrong? Ask yourself, what would someone smarter than me who disagrees say now? And most importantly, ask yourself, what am I protecting? Because confirmation bias isn't just about ideas. It's about identity. Beliefs become part of who you are. And when someone challenges your beliefs, you feel like they are challenging you, but they're not. They're offering you a door, an exit from the loop, and if you are brave enough to go through it, you may find something better than being right. You may find something real. You hear about a plane crash, an incident, a moment of chaos frozen in the headlines, repeated in news cycles, dissected in detail. Suddenly, flying seems dangerous. Your stomach shrinks at the thought of getting on board. You imagine yourself falling from the sky, trapped in a tube of fire and metal. You know the statistics. You know it's safer than driving. But that doesn't matter. The image is too recent, too vivid. And your brain doesn't calculate risk with numbers. It calculates it with memory. This is the availability heuristic, the tendency of the mind to judge the probability of something based on how easily examples come to mind. And it is one of the most deceptive tricks your brain plays on you. Because what you remember most vividly is not what happens most often. It is what impacts you the most. It's not just about accidents. It's about anything. You watch a police series and start closing the doors better. You hear about a shark attack, and the ocean seems like a battlefield. You see a video of a protest that turns violent, and suddenly, all protests seem like riots. The availability heuristic takes isolated events and turns them into patterns. It turns headlines into beliefs, warnings. But it's worse because it not only shapes fear, it shapes everything. You hear a story about someone who has become rich with cryptocurrencies, and you start to think it's easy. You read a viral success story, and you believe that success is just one bold step away. Your perception of reality leans towards what is vivid, not what is true. Imagine two friends. One spends hours every day doom scrolling, war, hunger, disasters. The other reads about art, philosophy, inventions. Who has a more accurate picture of the world? Neither, because they are both trapped in the same trap. Their attention has become their data. His memories have become his metrics, and none of them were memories he chose. They were chosen for them. That is the trick. The availability heuristic does not ask you what is real. It asks you what is accessible. And accessibility depends on repetition, emotion, and novelty. It depends on what the world has put in front of you and how recently you think you are making informed judgments. But in reality, you're only taking answers from the top of a mixed deck, convinced that the order means something. And it's not your fault. The brain was never built for objectivity. It was built for speed. Thousands of years ago, remembering the only time you saw a lion was more important than calculating how rare lions were. So memory became emotion's favorite tool. What scared you marked you. What impacted you is engraved on you. What felt extreme felt important. That's how you survived. But now that same mechanism hijacks your reasoning. It makes the terrifying seem probable. It makes the common seem irrelevant. You see a single reported side effect from a vaccine, and you panic, but you forget the millions who felt nothing. You hear about a person who beat cancer with meditation, and you doubt medical treatment. You hear about a lottery winner, and you think, why not me? But you never meet the other 999,999% who lost. You don't remember the silence, just the story. The availability heuristic is a spotlight. Wherever it shines, attention follows, and everything outside the beam disappears. This matters because your decisions are built on those beams. What you eat, who you trust, how you vote, what you fear. You think you're using logic, but you're using memory. And memory is shaped by emotion, by the media, by algorithms that know exactly how to make something unforgettable. Because in this economy, attention is currency and fear sells. So the system floods you with images designed to be engraved. Murders, scandals, disasters. The more shocking, the more profitable. And once they are recorded, they spread. You talk about it, you share it, you transmit it. The heuristic becomes a virus, and the illusion becomes culture. And here is the sickening irony. The more you hear something, the more available it becomes. The more available it becomes, the more likely it seems. And the more likely it seems, the more it shapes your behavior. That's how a single story can change politics. How a single tragedy can justify a war. How perception, if not controlled, becomes reality. But it's not just external, it's also internal. You remember your failures more vividly than your victories, so you assume you are always failing. You remember that time you were humiliated in front of a group of people, so public speaking becomes a monster. You remember the rejection, not the acceptance. The heartbreak, not the healing. The image you have of yourself is not based on balance, but on what your memory reproduces most strongly. And memory doesn't care about precision. It cares about intensity. So what can you do? First, take a pause. Recognize the sensation, that wave of certainty that tells you that this is dangerous, that it is habitual, or that this is how you are. Take a pause before you trust it. Ask yourself if that thought is based on evidence, or if it is just what you remember. Secondly, look for silence. Look for the data that you do not see, the lives that were not headlines, the stories that were not trending, the results too boring to go viral. The truth often lives in the silence. Third, diversify your information sources. Do not let any source shape your world. Do not let a single story define your fears. Do not let a vivid moment override 1,000 silent truths. Expand your perspective. Balance your memory with context. And above all, maintain humility, because the availability heuristic is not a defect. It is a mirror. It does not show you how the world is, but what your mind is made of. It shows you what you are afraid of, what you long for, what you have not yet healed. And if you can see that, if you can stand in the beam of light and look beyond, then you have not only been smarter than the scam, you have recovered your reality. You are too deep into it. You have spent the money. You have invested the time. You have sacrificed your peace so you stay. Not because it is working, not because it is the right thing, but because you have already given too much. This is the sunk cost fallacy. The lie that what you have already lost means that you must continue losing more. You remain in a relationship that drains you because you have been together for 5 years. You keep afloat a failing business because you have invested too much to leave now. You finish a book that you hate because you have already read 300 pages. And you call that loyalty. You call it determination, but it is not. It is fear disguised as logic. It is refusing to accept that what is gone is gone. Your brain does not want to waste. It is programmed to complete, to close, so it clings to losses as if they still had value. But they do not. That money is spent. That time is lived. That version of yourself that made the decision is gone. All that remains is now. And what matters now is not what it cost. What matters is if it's still worth something. But that is the trap. The fallacy does not whisper, it screams. It reminds you everything you have given, everything you have endured, everything you will have to admit if you leave it turns abandonment into failure, letting go into weakness. And so you keep going, not because it is the right thing to do, but because stopping feels worse. It feels like a betrayal, like a waste, like admitting that you were wrong. And the human mind will do anything to avoid that pain. It will justify it, it will distort it, it will tell you that just a little more effort, a little more time, a little more pain, and that everything will be worth it. But worth what? That is the question we avoid because the truth is brutal. Past investment does not guarantee future performance. The pain endured does not make something noble, and staying committed to the wrong path does not make it the right one. It only makes the wound deeper. Imagine this. You buy a ticket to a concert for $150. The night comes, and you are sick, exhausted. It is raining. You do not want to go, but you do it because otherwise the money is wasted. But it is already gone. It has been spent. Whether you go or not, the cost does not change. All you are doing now is trading your time and comfort to justify something that cannot be undone. That is what makes it a fallacy. It seems logical, but it is not. Now, expand the perspective. Think big. Your career, your marriage, your home, your identity. How much of what you cling to is just a monument to what it has already cost you? You say, I cannot leave now, not after all I have sacrificed. But why not? Why should sacrifice chain you instead of freeing you? Why should pain demand more pain? It shouldn't. But this bias is very ingrained. They teach it to us, glorify it, and impose it under the flag of the. But persistence in the wrong direction is just a slow collapse. You are not saving anything. You are prolonging its death. Companies do it. Governments do it. People do it every day. They invest in failed systems, policies, broken models because they have already paid too much to admit they did not work. And they call it strategy. But it is just fear disguised as commitment. And it ruins lives. Because the real cost is staying. The emotional cost of pretending. The time you will never recover. The opportunity you lose while feeding a ghost. Every minute spent trying to recover a loss is a minute you don't spend building something new. Every hour spent justifying the past is an hour stolen from the future. Every gram of energy wasted on what no longer works is energy you will never spend on what could be. That is the theft, not the money, not the time, but the future you sacrifice to make peace with the past. And this fallacy thrives in silence. You don't talk about it. You tell yourself that you're being responsible, committed, mature, but inside, you are exhausted. Inside, you know it. And even so, you stay. Because leaving does not seem like freedom. It seems like defeat, but it is not. It is clarity. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is cut the rope, let the anchor sink, admit you have lost something, and choose not to lose more. This is what we forget. The sunk cost is fact. The fallacy is acting as if it still mattered. You owe nothing to your past, neither your time, money, nor your soul. The only thing you owe is to your present self and the life you still have time to build. So ask yourself, if you had not invested anything, would you choose this now? If the answer is no, you already know what to do. You know someone who speaks with certainty, out loud, with confidence, unwavering. He explains a topic that he barely understands as if he were an expert. Each sentence is a lecture, each opinion a fact, and something about it seems wrong to you. Because behind the confidence you perceive a void, a hole, without depth or nuances, only volume. And you wonder how someone can know so little and still believe they are right. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. It is not just ignorance, it is ignorance of ignorance. A cognitive illusion where the least competent people overestimate their capacity precisely because they lack the knowledge to see how little they know. Their skills are too low to recognize their mistakes. So instead of doubting, they feel certainty. Instead of hesitating, they feel clarity. And that false clarity is contagious. It happens everywhere. In meetings, someone who has barely read the report dominates a conversation. On social networks, an anonymous profile speaks about science as if they had invented it. At parties, a guy who once saw a documentary explains world politics like an experienced diplomat. They don't lie. They don't pretend. They believe that they know what they are talking about. And that is what makes it dangerous, because confidence persuades, drowns out subtlety, silences humility, sells false knowledge as truth. And what is worse, it also convinces the speaker. The Dunning-Kruger effect gets its name from a study carried out in 1999 by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. They discovered that people who obtained worse results in tests of logic, grammar, or humor systematically overestimated their performance. Not slightly, but dramatically. And when they were asked to value their capacity, they placed themselves near the top. Not because they were arrogant, but because their lack of skill prevented them from seeing their own mistakes. It's like someone singing out of tune, but not hearing it. They're not being daring. They're simply not aware. But here is the darkest twist. Those who are competent, those who understand the subject, often underestimate themselves. They know how complex the subject is. They have seen how much there is to learn, and as they are aware of what they do not know, they rate themselves more modestly. So the paradox appears. The less you know, the more confident you feel. The more you know, the more doubts arise. This is not just a funny observation. It explains real-world disasters, inexperienced leaders who make reckless decisions, people who reject medical treatment in favor of internet theories, dangerous confidence that leads to dangerous results because certainty, when it is out of place, becomes a weapon. And our systems are not designed to filter it. They reward it. Think about job interviews. We often hire the one who speaks with confidence, not the one who thinks cautiously. Think about politics. The loudest voice wins the votes, not the most informed. Think about social networks. The more confident you seem, the more likes you get. Uncertainty is not trending. Humility does not go viral. And so, the Dunning-Kruger effect is not only something personal, it is cultural. It shapes the people we follow, the voices we amplify, and the truths we accept, and it reinforces itself. Because when the loudest voices are wrong and the quietest are right, we learn to trust the wrong signals. Volume over validity, certainty over content. And once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It's everywhere. It appears in discussions. The one who interrupts is the one who knows the least. It appears in teaching. The student who believes they have mastered the subject after a class, while the one who studies all night continues to feel insecure. It appears in daily life, in how we judge others, and how we judge ourselves. And it affects you too, because no one is immune. At some point, you have been the confident fool. Everyone has been. You have said something with conviction only to realize later how wrong you were. And at that moment, the illusion breaks. But until it does, it seems real. That is the danger. The effect does not seem like arrogance. It seems like clarity. And unless you actively question yourself, unless you're trained to doubt, you will not see the illusion at all. So how do we escape it? The first step is humility, not the performative kind, the one that says, I don't know enough, the one that is uncomfortable, that invites correction, that lives in uncertainty and still appears. True humility does not whisper, it listens. The second step is learning, a deep, slow, and frustrating learning. Because the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that awareness is the antidote. It creates the gap between confidence and competence. It teaches you to stay with the questions longer, to test your assumptions, to make better. And the third step, perhaps the most difficult, is to question your own clarity. Not always, but especially when you feel safe. Ask yourself, could I be wrong? Ask yourself, what if I have misunderstood everything? Because that moment of hesitation, that flash of doubt, could be the only thing that stands between you and a mistake you don't see yet. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not about calling other people stupid. It is about recognizing the blindfold that we all wear. It is about knowing that feeling intelligent and being right are not the same. And that confidence does not replace depth. In the end, the real danger is not ignorance. It is certainty without justification. And true wisdom is not in knowing everything. It is in knowing how little you truly understand. You are a better driver than the average, smarter than most, more moral, more objective, more insightful. You are not arrogant. You're just realistic. You have seen others. You know how imperfect they are, how clumsy, how superficial, how irrational. In comparison with them, you're doing it well, maybe even excellently. The only problem is that, statistically, everyone feels that way. This is illusory superiority, the silent delusion that you are better than those around you. It does not scream. It does not boast. It whispers enough to make you feel justified, balanced, and fair. But the numbers don't add up. Not everyone can be above average. And yet, most of us believe we are. It starts early. You get an excellent grade on a test at school and suddenly assume that you are naturally gifted. You give advice to someone and they listen. You see others make mistakes that you would not. Little by little, silently, a story forms. I understand it. They don't. You don't realize how the story is built. It happens in the background, confirmed by small hints, reinforced by social networks, and hardened by comparison. And that is the fuel, comparison. You don't judge yourself to the full standard, only by the parts that flatter you. You compare your best qualities with the worst moments of another person, your thoughtful opinions with the reckless diatribes of another person, your selected values with the exposed defects of another person. And every time you win that silent contest, your self-image grows just a little. Not because it is true, but because it feels good. You see someone running a red light and think, idiot, but when you drive fast you had a reason. You see someone losing their temper and call it immaturity. But when you lose your temper, it was justified. The world has pushed you too much. You see someone falter in conversation and you are ashamed. But when you say something uncomfortable, you repeat it later with a dozen excuses. Superiority is not about being a narcissist. It is about being human. It is a cognitive shortcut, a trick your mind uses to maintain confidence, to cushion shame, to stabilize your identity. Because life is uncertain, messy, difficult. You need to believe that you're doing it well, maybe better than well, maybe better than most. But that belief comes at a price. Because once you accept that you are better than others, even subtly, you stop learning from them. You stop listening completely. You discard disagreement. You assume that the problem is them, their ignorance, their weakness, their bias. It makes you harder to reach, harder to teach, harder to grow. It happens in friendships. You think you're the most rational, the best communicator, the most emotionally intelligent. So when a conflict arises, you don't ask what you missed. You assume they missed something. It happens at work. You see yourself as the one who understands everything. So when decisions go against you, you assume the team has made a mistake. You stop asking yourself, what have I overlooked? And you start to think that they will see that I was right eventually. It happens in politics, in debates, in all forms of identity. You look to the other side of the aisle and see irrationality, corruption, blindness. But on your own side, passion, conviction, truth make you forget that the same chemicals are running through everyone's brain, that the same shortcuts are working, that you are not outside the system. You are the system. The scariest thing about eloquent superiority is that it seems so reasonable, so calm, so obvious. You don't go around thinking you're better than everyone else. You simply feel it silently. And the more secure you feel in that feeling, the more invisible it becomes. It becomes part of your operating system, but there is a cost because superiority isolates. It puts you alone in an unattainable tower. You lose the opportunity to be wrong, to be humiliated, to learn. You become the person others can't connect with, not because you're cold, but because your sense of superiority dulls your ability to know people as they are. And little by little, subtly, that undermines empathy. Because if you are better, others are worse. And if they are worse, their mistakes are predictable. Their pain is avoidable. Their struggles are the result of flaws you don't share. That belief breaks things. Relationships, trust, and compassion. It turns people into problems instead of mirrors. So, how do you fight something so silent, so deeply interwoven in your thinking? First, assume that you're wrong. Not always, not fatally, but assume that there is something you have missed each time. Practice uncertainty, not in a performative way, but with true discomfort. Say the words aloud. I may not be as right as I think I am. Secondly, look for disconfirming evidence. Look for people who see things differently and ask them why. Not to correct them, but to understand them. Not to win, but rather to learn. Treat disagreement not as a threat, but as a useful tool. Third, reflect upon your own history. Not only your victories, but also your own blind spots. The times you were sure, and then you weren't. The beliefs you held that were not sustained. Use your own history to loosen your grip on feeling superior. And finally, humble yourself, not out of shame, but to access truth. Superiority is a ladder, but truth lives in the dirt, in humble questions, in uncertain pauses, in the moments when you let go of the need to be right and simply listen. That's where wisdom lies. That's where real connection lives. The illusion says you are above others. The truth whispers to you, you are one of them. Believe the whisper. You walk into a room and feel all eyes turn toward you. You trip over the edge of a rug and then blush. You say something awkward in a conversation and replay it for hours, convinced that everyone has noticed, judged, and remembered it. But that is not the case. Most people haven't even heard a thing. Others have forgotten it within seconds. The only person who carries it like a wound is you alone. This is the spotlight effect of the effect, believing that others pay more attention to you than they really pay you. That you are on a stage, always illuminated, always observed, but you're really not. In most people's stories, you're not even a minor character. You are a blur, a footnote, a flash in their crowded mental sky. And yet, it all seems so real. Your brain is the center of your world, so it assumes it's the center of everyone's. It takes your shyness and projects it outward, believing that others are watching you as closely as you watch yourself. But they don't. They're too busy looking at themselves. Everyone is trapped inside their own spotlight. You put on a new shirt and worry that it's too flashy, but no one notices. You stutter in a meeting and think you have lost all credibility, but everyone was distracted by their own nerves. You post something on the internet and overanalyze every word, every like, every silence, but no one analyzes it as you do. They have just kept scrolling. They have moved on to something else now. And that is the painful, liberating truth. You're not the protagonist of anyone's story but your own. The spotlight effect remains subtle. It doesn't scream aloud. It resonates in the background of all your thoughts. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you self-censor often. It makes you afraid to fully show yourself. convinced that the world is always watching you, always criticizing everything. But that is not how it is. Most of the time, they are not thinking of you. They are thinking about themselves, how they look, how they sound, and how they express themselves. Everyone looks in their own mirror, not yours. This illusion distorts memory. It makes small moments feel colossal. That time your voice broke during a speech, you replayed it for weeks. That joke that fell flat at a party. You felt exposed, vulnerable, but the room moved on. People went back to their drinks, thoughts, and lives. You were the only one that kept being there, suspended in the consciousness of yourself. It also kills confidence. You don't try to do things, you don't raise your hand, you don't speak, not because you don't have courage, but because you're afraid of being the center of attention that may not even exist. You imagine the worst. Laughs, whispers, judgments. But most people are not looking with malice. They are not even looking. And the tragedy is that the focus effect not only makes you feel seen, it makes you feel seen wrongly. You assume that people are noticing your defects, clumsiness, and imperfections. You believe they see you as you do in your lowest moments. But that is not how it is. They see fragments, moments. Sometimes, they don't see you at all. The irony is that even when they notice, they quickly forget. Human beings are machines for remembering their own experiences. Yours fade into theirs like shadows at sunset. Even moments that seem decisive to you are just background noise for others. Your worst memory is another person's fleeting look. And once you deeply accept this, you start to feel free. You start to speak with more freedom, move with more comfort, and take risks with more audacity. Because the truth is that nobody watches you as you believe. And those few who do are more prone to admire your authenticity than judge your errors. So, what do you do with the focus effect? You get off stage. You stop acting. You stop living as if each moment was being transmitted live, as if each stumble were scandal. Breathe. Laugh. Forget about yourself on purpose. You give others the gift of not being your imaginary audience. And by doing so, you give yourself space to be real. Because the real growth, the real connection, the real life does not happen under a focus. It happens in the shadows, in the improvised, unpolished, unnoticed moments. The focus is a lie. Let it go. You hear talk of someone who has lost everything. A car accident, a medical bill, a bad diagnosis, and somewhere in your mind a thought whispers, they must have done something wrong. Not because you are cruel, not because you don't care, but because a part of you needs the world to make sense, to be fair. This is the just world hypothesis. The belief that people get what they deserve, that good things happen to good people, and that bad things happen for a reason. It is comforting. He is orderly. He makes chaos look like order. But it is a lie, a deep and dangerous lie that lives in how we explain suffering. The just world hypothesis says, if you follow the rules, you'll be fine. If you work hard, you'll be successful. If you are kind, you'll be protected. And when you see someone suffering, logic does not question the system, but them. You think they made bad decisions, that they didn't try hard enough, that they must have done something to deserve it. Because the alternative of the world is random, indifferent, and brutal, is too unbearable to bear. So you build a story, a narrative that protects your sense of security. You tell yourself that misfortune follows guilt, that if someone is suffering, they must have caused it. That tragedy is the price of some hidden sin. It doesn't feel like guilt, it feels like logic, but it is. It is the mind seeking control where there is none, and it blinds you. It blinds you to the innocent, to the unfortunate, to the systems and structures that crush people regardless of their merit. It makes you judge the vagabond before knowing their story. It makes you look askance at the single mother, the addict who struggles to get ahead, the unemployed graduate. You tell yourself that you are just being realistic, but it is not so. You are defending an illusion because the truth is that bad things happen to good people all the time and good things happen to bad people. The world does not reward virtue as we would like it to. It rewards power, access, opportune moment, place of birth, and sometimes simply blind and ruthless luck. But if you believe in a just world, that truth seems dangerous to you. So you resist it. You rewrite the facts. You distort your empathy. You find flaws in the victim, not because it is fair, but because it is safer to believe that they are guilty than to accept that they are like you and have still lost everything. And this lie, this soft and seductive lie, has consequences. It makes you less compassionate, less curious, less connected. It moves you away from suffering instead of bringing you closer to it. It makes you believe that misfortune is contagious, that if you get too close, if you get too involved, you'll be next. And the worst of all is that it turns against you. Because when life finally punches you in the mouth, and the just world hypothesis offers no consolation, it offers guilt. Suddenly, your pain is not just pain. It is proof that you have failed, that you deserve it, that you must have done something wrong. You start to wonder, why me? And the voice that you have fed for years answers, because you earned it. That is the poison. You built this story to protect yourself, but now it condemns you. So how do you break it? First, tell the truth out loud. Say it. The world is not fair. Not all pain is deserved. Not all rewards are deserved. Let that truth weigh on your chest. Let it undo the false order you have built. Secondly, practice unconditional compassion. Help people not because they are perfect victims, not because they deserve it, but because they are suffering, because suffering in itself is reason enough. That is the highest form of justice. It is not punishment. It is not reward, but presence. Third, challenge your reflexes. When you see someone fall, don't ask, what have they done? Ask, what happened to them? Ask what they might need. Turn judgment into a question. Turn fear into caring. And lastly, give yourself mercy too. When things fall apart, when your plans fall apart, when pain arrives, don't seek the mistake. Don't try to solve your own pain as if it were a crime. Let be. Let hurt. Let be meaningless. That is not failure. That is what being human means. The just world hypothesis. Just world hypothesis sells the fantasy that if you do everything right, nothing bad will happen. But the truth is harder and more beautiful. The truth is that bad things happen, and you will survive them. You will grow. You will open up to others. And when others fall, you will not look away because you know the truth. The world is not fair, but you can be. You think you're a good person, honest, consistent, rational, and then you do something that does not agree. You lie, you cheat, you hurt someone, you waste time, you say the wrong thing, you break your own promise, and instead of facing it, you cower, you misrepresent the story, you justify yourself, you find a way, any way to make it fit because your mind cannot tolerate the contradiction. This is cognitive dissonance. The mental pain that comes from holding two opposing truths at the same time. Self-image and behavior, belief and action, values and the violations. And when they collide, something has to give. Not the behavior, but the belief. You don't admit that you have been wrong. You change what wrong means. It's not that you betrayed someone. It's that they weren't loyal enough. It's not that you have wasted years. It's that you have learned a lot. It's not that you ignored the warning signs. It's that they were never so clear. You restructure the memory. You distort reality. Not because you are dishonest, but because your brain is desperate to stop the discomfort. Contradiction hurts. So you build a bridge, a lie, a loophole, a patch to keep your identity intact. Because identity is fragile. It needs coherence. It needs to believe that you are who you say you are, that your actions make sense, that your values are intact. But life is not clean, and neither are we. So we become story editors, not liars, conciliators. We soften the edges of the contradiction to avoid the pain of hypocrisy. But every time we do, we move a little further from the truth. That is why change is so difficult. Not because people don't want to grow, but because growth requires confrontation. It demands that you say, I was wrong, and that phrase burns. It unravels the old self. And the brain resists that collapse with all its might. You see in relationships. You fall in love with someone who treats you badly. But instead of admitting that they don't fit, you convince yourself that they have misunderstood you, that you are too sensitive, that love means staying. Because admitting that you are with the wrong person means admitting that you have stayed too long and that the dissonance is too strong. So you prefer to live with the illusion. You can see it in politics. You support a leader who does something indefensible and, instead of walking away, you twist the logic around. It is taken out of context often. It It is not as bad as it seems now. They are still better than other alternatives. Because if you admit that they are imperfect, you have to admit that they have deceived you. And the ego would burn before bending. You see it within all belief systems. People are more loyal to consistency than to being right. Once a belief is chosen, each new piece of information is filtered through it. Anything that contradicts it is reinterpreted, rejected, or even ridiculed. Not because the evidence is bad, rather because the alternative is unbearable. I have built myself upon something false. And so, the scaffolding grows layer by layer. Justifications, excuses, selective memory, social reinforcement, until the truth is so deeply buried under protective logic that it cannot be touched. The person becomes like a fortress and nothing can enter. But inside that fortress, there's conflict. Because the brain knows that somewhere beneath all reasoning, there's a flash of dissonance, a feeling that something just does not fit. And it haunts you at night in silence, in hesitation, in the pain you cannot quite explain. So what will you do? You numb the feeling. You distract only yourself. You bury yourself in certainty now. You surround yourself with only people who agree with you. You turn the dissonance into anger, into guilt, into noise, into anything to avoid that condemning and silent whisper. This is not who I thought I was. But here, like truth itself, dissonance is not the enemy. It is the very beginning of clarity. It is a sign that your beliefs are alive, that they're being tested, that you grow. It hurts, yes, but that pain is the price of being real, of aligning the self you project with the self that you live. The alternative is just stagnation. Living inside a curated fiction now. Defending a version of yourself that no longer exists or never existed. So when you feel dissonance, do not run away. Just pause. Let it hurt now. Ask yourself, what am I protecting here? Ask yourself, what would happen if I admitted that I was wrong? And most importantly, what would happen if I truly did? Because every time you silence dissonance, you exchange truth for comfort instead. And that comfort simply rots. But when you face it, when you sit in it without blinking, something always changes. The lie breaks, the story cracks open. And through that fracture, a truer self begins to finally emerge. It is not perfect now, but it is complete. You win just $50. It feels really good. A pleasant surprise, a small boost of pure joy. But then you lose $50, and it hurts more than the victory helped you. You feel a pang of regret, of frustration, a bit of panic. The gain felt light, the loss feels heavy. This feeling is loss aversion. The idea that losses seem bigger than gains, that it hurts us more to lose what we have than the pleasure of winning something new. It sounds simple, obvious, but it runs very deep. It shapes your choices, your habits, and fears. It makes you cling to the status quo, even when failing. It makes you say no to risk, even when the advantages outweigh the danger. It turns you into a prisoner of what you already possess. Loss aversion not only influences money, it infects everything. Relationships, jobs, beliefs, identity. You stay in friendships that have emptied because leaving them makes you feel as if you were losing a part of yourself. You keep clothes that you never wear, books that you will never read, dreams that no longer fit because letting them go feels like giving up. You accumulate things not because they serve you, but because you once paid for them. You build your life around not wanting to lose, and little by little, it becomes your compass. You stop asking yourself what is possible. You start asking yourself what is safe. You do not choose the path that excites you. You choose the one that seems less dangerous to abandon. You do not go after what you want. You protect what you already have, even if it is broken, even if it is costing you peace. Imagine that they offer you a bet, flipping a coin. If it comes up heads, you win $100. If it comes up tails, you lose 100. Most people will say no. The potential gain isn't enough to compensate for the fear of loss, but offer them 200 to win, the same 100 to lose, and only then do they begin considering it. The pain of losing 100 is so intense that twice the reward is needed to make it seem fair. That is not logic, that is wiring. Because your brain evolved in a world of scarcity, losing a resource could mean death. The food you lost was not just calories, it meant survival. So the mind learned to overvalue what it had to fight harder to keep than win. And that instinct remained with us long after the jungle became a spreadsheet. But here, like the trap of the modern world, loss aversion can blind us. You avoid leaving a career you hate because you have already invested 10 years. You stay in a city that exhausts you because moving feels like failure. You do not give up on a goal that no longer excites you because stopping feels like losing momentum. We confuse momentum with purpose, stability with meaning. And over time, our life becomes a museum of things we fear losing. Even our personality gets locked up. We define ourselves by old beliefs, obsolete preferences, roles that you no longer need because changing them feels like a kind of death. You say, "That's just how I am," even when it is no longer true, even when it has not been for years. Loss aversion feeds on identity. It tells you, if you leave this, you will be less. But the truth is quite the opposite. Letting go creates space. It clears the way, frees your energy from protecting what no longer serves you. But that freedom requires pain. It requires letting the loss hurt and not running from it. And that is where most people stop, because the pain, even for the small things, feels real. Letting go of an old version of yourself, an old dream, an old plan. It burns. But if you avoid that burning, you will spend your life in orbit around it, avoiding risk, avoiding growth, avoiding the unknown. And loss aversion loves the known, even when it's miserable. You will prefer a sure failure to an uncertain future. You will cling to what is broken because it is at least familiar. You will turn your back to the doors that could open because the ones you have behind you already seem like home. And the irony is that you're losing all the time, every day, every minute, time, opportunities, energy. But since you do not feel those losses, you do not fear them. The aversion to loss only works when the loss is visible, immediate, tangible. So we ignore the slow bleeding to avoid a deep cut. But the deep cut is where healing can begin. So, how do you fight against this? You ask yourself different questions. Not what you can lose, but what you risk if you do not try. Not how much you have invested, but whether it still serves you. You learn to tolerate discomfort, to let go without labeling it failure, to measure progress not by what you have kept, but by what you released. Because freedom is not in control, it is in liberation. The aversion to loss says to protect what you have, but growth whispers, let it go. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not hold on tighter, but walk away. You have a white ceramic coffee cup, nothing special. Someone asks you if you will sell it. You say that maybe for $10, but ask another person, someone who has never had it, how much they would pay, and they tell you maybe $3. The same object, in the same conditions, different value. Why? Because it is yours. This is the endowment effect, the strange illusion that owning something makes it worth more. Not objectively, not economically, but psychologically, emotionally. You did not buy the cup because it was special. It became special because you bought it. And it is not limited to cups. It affects everything you own, everything you chose, everything you identify with. It makes letting go feel like losing a part of yourself. Even when the object is useless, broken, replaceable. Even when keeping it costs you more than it is worth. Because once you claim something, an idea, a possession, a belief, it becomes intertwined with you. And separating from it is like cutting your skin. That is the scam. You believe that your attachment is rational, that its value is real. But it is not. The value was assigned the moment it became yours. You value it because you touched it, because you chose it, because you put a small part of your identity in it. And now that it is attached to you, giving it up feels like shrinking. The endowment effect is not limited to things. It is about oneself. It explains why people keep clothes that do not fit well, shoes that they never wear, appliances that they do not use. It explains why someone does not want to sell their house, even when it has become too small. Why they fight over family heirlooms that collect dust in a box. Why they ask too much for a car that is rusting in the garage. It is not the object that they protect. It is the history of ownership, and it is not limited to things. You feel it with ideas, with your opinions, with the beliefs that you have had for years. Even if they no longer serve you, Even if they limit you, you cling to them because you have held them for too long. Admitting that they are outdated is like surrendering, like erasing a version of yourself that you have spent years building. You feel it in discussions. You defend a position not because it is correct, but because it is yours. You have invested time, pride, identity, and that is why you cling. Stop listening then. You feel attacked, not corrected, because what is questioned is not the idea, but yourself. And the more public something is, the harder it is to let go. You feel it in relationships. You stay with someone not because it works, but because you have invested years into it. You feel the weight of that time. You think, I cannot leave now. But the value that you feel is not in the person, but the history. You have claimed it, built a life around it, and that story becomes a cage. You feel it with plans, with objectives. You start a project, and halfway through, you realize that it is not going anywhere, but you finish it because leaving it would mean wasting the effort. You keep going even if the result makes no sense. Because once you call it yours, your mind exaggerates its value. Possession distorts reality. The endowment effect is why we overvalue what we sell, why we accumulate, why we take criticism personally, why we resist change. Not because the new is bad, but because the old is ours. We are not defending value. We are defending attachment. And it happens quickly. You can sit in a chair for 5 minutes and feel territorial. You can take sides in a debate and feel loyalty in seconds. You can name a goldfish and suddenly worry about whether it lives or dies. The moment you choose something, you protect it. Not because it is worth more, but because you want it to be. And here is the damage. The endowment effect makes you afraid to let go, sell, or unlearn. It paralyzes you, surrounded by things you do not need, ideas you do not believe, habits that do not serve you. All because you once said, this is mine. So how do you fight it? You practice detachment. You remind yourself, I am not what I possess. Question the feeling before acting accordingly. Ask, would I value this if it were not mine? Ask, if someone offered me this, would I want it? And most importantly, what is the cost of keeping it? Because each object, belief, bond that you defend has a hidden price. Energy, space, freedom, and sometimes the only way to grow is to burn what you have claimed. Possession gives security, but sometimes security is the lie. Letting go is the truth. You walk into a store and see a jacket marked at $400, much more than you would ever pay. But then, right next to it, you see another jacket for $200. Suddenly, it seems reasonable, like a bargain. You buy it feeling smart. You have saved $200. But have you, or has your brain fallen into the anchoring trap? This is the anchoring effect. The mind's tendency to rely too much on the first information it receives when making decisions. That first number, first idea, and first impression become a point of reference, and everything that comes after is compared to that anchor, whether it makes sense or not. Anchoring does not ask if something is fair. It asks how it feels in relation. The number 200 does not mean much by itself, but compared with 400, it seems like a bargain. Compared with 50, it seems expensive. The anchor changes the frame, and the frame changes everything. And it does not stop with purchases. Anchoring happens in negotiations. The first person to suggest a number sets a standard. Even if absurd, it draws conversation toward it. Someone says they want $100,000, and suddenly $80,000 seems little. But if they started with $60,000, that number would seem generous. The anchor is not truth, it is gravity. It drags your judgment toward it without permission. It happens in relationships. Someone treats you badly, but gradually improves. It goes from chaos to calm, from abandonment to attention. And since the anchor was so low, the minimum seems like love. You say, at least they are not like before. But you are not measuring health. You are measuring relative damage. Anchoring even distorts your self-esteem. You compare your progress with others, not with some objective metric, but with the first person you noticed. If they were ahead, you feel behind. If they were behind, you feel superior. But in any case, the point of reference was never neutral. It was personal, chosen arbitrarily. The brain clings to the first number, the first impression, the first story, and adapts slowly, with stubbornness. Even when new information arrives, the original anchor leaves a shadow, a residue that colors everything that comes after. You see in salaries. They offer you a job with a salary of $60,000 and you see 70 as an increase, even though the market price is 90. You anchor yourself to what you are used to, not to what is fair. And that anchor becomes a ceiling you try to break. You see in the objectives. You say, I want to lose 5 kilos. And suddenly, that number becomes sacred. Even if your body changes in other healthy ways, even if you gain muscle, you feel better, you sleep better, you still feel behind if the scale does not show the goal. The anchor distorts your sense of success. You see in fear. A doctor once gave you bad news. Now every checkup is measured based on that moment. You anchor yourself to the worst-case scenario, and everything becomes a potential return to it. Not because it is rational, but because it was the first thing. Anchoring is fast and unconscious. It happens before you realize it. And once established, it is difficult to escape from it. So how do you fight it? You reduce the speed. You name the anchor. You say it aloud. This number is influencing me. This story is dragging me. You separate the information from the decision and ask yourself, would I still choose this if I had not seen that? You re-anchor. You choose a new point of reference, a more objective one, a market average, a reliable source, a deeper value. You don't have to accept the first number they throw at you. You can return it, and you practice seeing things in isolation. A price is just a price, not a deal compared with something else. A person's effort is effort. It isn't impressive just because yesterday it was worse. A feeling is valid, not just when it eclipses a previous one. Anchoring tries to reduce your range, taking your judgment into the orbit of an arbitrary point, but your judgment can be broader, smarter, and freer. You don't have to compare everything to the first thing. You can restart. You can rethink. You can choose the anchor or choose to leave it completely. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Instantly, your mind fills in the blanks. They are reckless, arrogant, and probably always like that. You assume that it's how they are, their personality, their essence. But when you cut someone off, it's different. You were late, or you were distracted. You had a reason, context, and excuse. This is the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to explain others' behavior as a reflection of their character, while explaining your own behavior through circumstances. It is a double standard so deeply rooted in your thinking that you don't even realize it. You see someone being rude to a cashier, and you think, what an idiot. But when you answer someone badly, you think, I was tired. It has been a long day. They were being slow. You reduce others to labels and see yourself as a context. They are their actions. You are your intentions. And that gap is the distortion. It turns people into caricatures. A bad moment becomes a definition. A defect becomes a diagnosis. You lock them in a story that they did not write because it is easier than accommodating complexity, because it is safer than admitting that behavior is fluid, that mistakes are human, that context is invisible. The mind loves simplicity. It wants quick judgments, predictable patterns, so it over-attributes. It says, that guy didn't call me back. He doesn't care. She was abrupt with me. She is cold. They didn't pass the test. They are lazy. It skips the possibility that maybe he was busy. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe they were trying. But when the lens turns inward, the rules change. You failed because the instructions weren't clear. You missed the call because you felt overwhelmed. You lied because the truth would have hurt someone. You grant yourself the benefit of complexity, nuance, and grace. That is the core of the error. The grace to judge others and the judgment for oneself creates distance. It hinders relationships. It fuels resentment. You start to believe that you are surrounded by bad people who do bad things when, in reality, you are surrounded by human beings who make complicated decisions amid invisible struggles, just like you. It is noticeable in families. Your parents lose patience, and you label them as angry or impatient. But when you are impatient, they have provoked you. They have provoked you. You were just trying to keep composure. You never ask what they were enduring. It shows at work. A colleague does not meet a deadline, and you take it for granted that he is lazy, incompetent. But when you miss one, it was because of the workload. It was because of the stress. It was because of life. It shows in strangers. Someone dresses differently, speaks strangely, acts distant, and you fill in the story with judgments. Not because you are cruel, but because the brain is a narrator and it hates unfinished stories. So write the simplest one. They are like that because they are like that, but they are not. They are shaped by forces you cannot see. Stress. You don't know stories you will never hear. And the more you assume it's about how they are, the more empathy dies. The fundamental attribution error is not only unfair, but corrosive. It kills connection. It prevents you from understanding, asking questions, seeing people clearly. It keeps you angry longer than necessary. It fuels conflict. It builds walls. And when everyone makes the same mistake, society fractures, groups blame each other, stereotypes harden, forgiveness disappears because everyone is a villain in someone else's story based on a moment taken out of context. So how do you fight it? Start with this. Assume less. When someone disappoints you, pause before assigning a character. Ask, what else could explain this? What might I not be seeing? What would I want someone to assume about me in the same situation? Then, shift the perspective. When you make a mistake, don't rush to find context. Assume it. Allow yourself to be imperfect without defending yourself. Say, yes, I was wrong and I had my reasons, but I still take responsibility. This balance, grace toward others and honesty toward oneself, is uncommon. But it is where empathy resides. Because the truth is that we are not our worst moments. We are not assumptions of strangers. We are stories in motion, incomplete, interrupted, full of chapters that no one else has read. So the next time someone makes a mistake, before dismissing them, remember that you too have been misinterpreted. And someone somewhere gave you the benefit of the doubt. Be that person. You receive 10 compliments and 1 criticism. Guess which one resonates in your mind for hours, maybe days. You forget the compliments. You analyze the insult. You repeat the tone, the words, the expression. It affects your state of mind, confidence, and peace. Why? Because your brain values the negative more than the positive. It never has. This is the negativity bias. The tendency of the mind to focus more on what hurts than helps. Bad experiences leave deeper marks. Harsh words last longer. An error eclipses a dozen successes. And it is not weakness, it's just how you're wired. Your ancestors survived by avoiding danger, not pursuing joy. The cost of ignoring a threat was death. The cost of missing a compliment was nothing. So evolution sculpted a brain that prioritizes the negative. A mind that seeks danger remembers pain and clings to fear as if it were gold. It kept us alive, but now it makes us anxious. The negativity bias is not just about danger. It is about relevance. What impacts you most? What interrupts you most? What violates your expectations? You don't remember the 100 times someone was kind. You remember the only time they weren't. You don't remember all the quiet conversations. You remember the argument. You remember the pain. And the worst thing is that your brain thinks it's helping. It tells you, remember this so it doesn't happen again. Repeat this so we learn, but often there is no lesson, just pain in a loop, and the loop becomes your lens. You start to see the world through what went wrong, through what hurt, through what disappointed, and you miss what works, what is stable, what is quietly beautiful. You take this bias to all your relationships. You notice only the defect, the comment, the moment of distance. You forget the daily kindness, small guarantees, and the love that appears without warning in the silence, because it is not strong enough to compete with the pain. You take it to your self-image. You remember the failure, the slip, the moment when you said too much or not enough. You let that define you, even if it was years ago, even if no one else remembers. You tattoo it on your identity. And when someone offers you love, praise, or forgiveness, you back away because the negative seems realer. You take it to your memories. You revisit the regrets, the lost opportunities, the disappointments. You build monuments to pain, and you pass by them daily, forgetting that joy also had days. That laughter happened, that healing occurred. But those memories are softer. They fade faster. They don't scream, because negativity screams. It hijacks your attention. A bad comment online ruins your day. A missed message ruins your week. The silence of a person makes you question your worth. Even if 99 others were kind and supported you, you remember that one. And it is not your fault. It is how the mind works. But if you don't name it, if you don't recognize it, it becomes truth. You start believing that the world is negative, that people are cruel, that life is a disappointment. But that is bias speaking. So what do you do first? Detect the pattern. When your mind clings to a negative moment, pause. Ask yourself, is this the whole picture? What is it that I am not seeing? What good thing am I ignoring now? Make the invisible visible. Second, amplify the positive, not faking it, but realizing it. Train your attention. Name what works. Say out loud what you are grateful for. Savor what makes you feel good, even if it's something small, especially if it is small. Third, balance the scale. For every negative thought, think of 3 positive ones. Not to undo it, but to put into context. The brain exaggerates pain. You have to overpractice gratitude just to get to a point of balance. And finally, forgive yourself for remembering the pain. It is not weakness. It's survival software. But now you can rewrite the code. Because life is not just what happens to you. It is what your mind magnifies. And sometimes the most radical act of resistance is not fighting the darkness. It is choosing to see the light and letting it remain. You listen to a song on the radio, you don't like it. Then you listen to it again and again. In the end, you find yourself humming it. Think, maybe it's not so bad. A few more listens, and now it's your favorite. Not because it is better, but because it is familiar to you. You have been liking it little by little, silently, until you have felt it as yours. This is the mere exposure effect. The tendency to develop a preference for things simply because we're more exposed to them. Repetition creates comfort, and comfort resembles truth like beauty, like love. It is one of the most subtle psychological deceptions. You don't realize it's happening. You simply wake up one day feeling close to something that used to be distant. A face, a brand, a voice, a belief, not because it has changed, but because you stopped resisting. And that is the trick. Resistance fades with repetition. It works with people. You see someone often at work, at school, in your building. You don't know them, but they become familiar, safe, accessible. You start to like them not for who they are, but because your brain says, I know this face. This feels stable. It works with ideas. You read a headline once. It's strange. You see it again, interesting, a third time, and it begins to seem true to you. Not because it is backed by evidence, but because your brain recognizes it now. And recognition is perceived as reliability. There is the danger. The mere exposure effect does not care if something is good. It only cares if it is repeated. And in a world flooded with information, repetition wins. The loudest idea, the most shared image, the most reproduced audio fragment. What is familiar to us begins to seem right, even when it is wrong. That is how propaganda works. Repetition, not reason. You see the same phrase enough times, and it becomes part of your internal language. You don't question it. You repeat it, not because you believe it, but because it has stopped seeming strange. That is how advertising works. You see the logo everywhere, and suddenly, it seems trustworthy. Not because the product has earned your trust, but because your brain says, I have seen this before. Familiarity is masked as credibility. That is how manipulation works. A toxic idea, repeated with enough variations, begins to sound like common sense. Not because it is logical, but because it no longer feels strange. Time has smoothed the edges, and that is how habits are formed. You walk the same path, say the same phrases, think the same thoughts, not because they're the best, but because they are known, and what is known is comfortable, what is known is safe, even when it limits you. The simple exposure effect is the reason why you stay in routines that do not serve you, why you go back with people who do not challenge you, why you defend traditions that you have never questioned, because doing something over and over again turns it into a truth that your body recognizes, even when your mind does not agree. That is why you confuse nostalgia with quality. You remember something from your childhood, and it feels sacred, not because it was perfect, but because it was the first, because you heard over and over before you knew how to filter. That is why music sounds better the second time. That is why a movie seems warmer when you see it again. Not because the art has changed, but because you have. You lowered your guard. You stopped analyzing. You allowed it to become part of your internal rhythm. But here, as a problem, comfort is not the same as value, and repetition is not the same as truth. So how to resist the attraction? You question your preferences. You ask, do I really like this, or have I seen it too many times? Do I believe in this, or is it just familiar? Is this path mine, or is it just the one I have traveled most often? You make room for the new, for discomfort, for ideas, people, and patterns that are strange to you, because that strangeness is a sign of growth. Familiarity is easy. Novelty requires attention, and attention is the way to recover your mind. You limit involuntary repetition. You choose your inputs. You select what you let resonate in your thoughts, because everything that is repeated takes root, and everything that takes root becomes a belief. And remember the first time you heard your favorite song. You didn't even like it. You gave it a chance. You let sound. You learned its rhythm. But here is the question. The exposure made it adorable. Not the quality, nor the essence, but only the frequency. So be careful what you listen to on loop, because even lies sound like home if you repeat them enough. You buy a piece of furniture. It comes in a flat box. Inside, wood panels, tiny screws, vague instructions. You spend the afternoon cursing, assembling, and correcting mistakes. When it is finally finished, twisted and all, you step back and smile. It is perfect, not because it has no defects, but because you built it. This is the IKEA effect, the tendency to overvalue things that we have partially created. The act of building, contributing, or personalizing something makes us believe that it is worth more, not in the market, but in meaning. We do not only see the object, we see ourselves inside it. And that is where illusion begins. Because the value is not objective. It is emotional, personal, and distorted. You put in effort, and that effort inflates your attachment, makes it harder to walk away, admit defects, see the thing clearly. You do not love it because it is great. You love it because you made it. The IKEA effect appears everywhere. You see in ideas. A solution occurs to you, and now it seems sacred. You defend it. You promote it. Even when better options appear, you doubt it because your footprints are on it. Abandoning it is like abandoning part of you. You see it at work. You build a project from scratch, and now it seems untouchable to you. You overlook its weaknesses. You resist comments because it is yours. You do not want it to improve. You want it to be admired. You see it in relationships, investing time, effort, and emotional work. You fix, bend, and give. And now, even if the relationship is unhealthy, you cannot leave because you built it. You do not want to lose the work. You confuse effort with compatibility. You confuse sweat with destiny. You see it in identity. You build an image of who you are, curated, practiced, protected. And even when life takes you in new directions, you cling to that image because you made it. Because starting again would mean admitting that version was not the definitive one. And that is what the IKEA effect protects you from, doubt. The effort makes something seem real. It is difficult to let go of what it costs you to create, even if it is imperfect, even if it is holding you back. Because letting go is not only a loss. It is a rejection of your own work. But the cost of that protection is clarity. The IKEA effect blinds you to alternatives. You don't compare fairly. You don't adapt easily. You ignore better paths because yours cost you work. You remain faithful to ideas that no longer work. You defend systems that no longer serve. All because you built them. And this bias can trap you. It can keep you married to things that exhaust you, committed to goals that no longer excite you. It can turn personal improvement into self-protection. You don't grow, you defend. You don't question, you conserve. So how to break free? You learn to separate effort from result. You say, just because I built it doesn't mean it's good. Just because I created it doesn't mean it can't be improved or replaced. You learn to honor the work without worshiping the result. You ask yourself, would I value this if I hadn't done it? Would I choose it now, knowing what I know? And, above all, you practice walking away. Not from everything, but from the things that no longer serve you. even if you gave yourself completely to them, even if they carry your footprints, because the goal of the effort is not ownership, it is learning. You don't betray the work by letting it go. You are honoring what it taught you. The Ike effect tells you that effort equals value. But the truth is more radical. The value is not in what you build, but in your ability to rebuild. You believe that most people would agree with you, not on everything, but on the important things, on what is fair, on what is intelligent, on what is obviously wrong. You assume that your beliefs, your preferences, your values are not only personal, but are normal, common sense, shared by the majority. This is the effect of false consensus, the tendency to overestimate how much others agree with us, believing that our perspective is more widespread than it really is. And when someone disagrees, it feels strange, confusing, even threatening, because you thought you were the center of the bell curve, the average, the default. You were, and that understanding hurts because the effect of false consensus is not just about being wrong. It's about realizing that your vision of the world is smaller than you thought, that your ideas are not universal, that your values are not obvious, that your culture, your habits, your normality may not even register on someone else's radar. You take it for granted that your humor is shared, that your political leanings are reasonable, that your tastes are standard, that your ethics are common ground, but they are not. They are yours, shaped by your environment, your education, your experiences. And while that gives them meaning, it doesn't give them dominion. But the mind does not care about precision. It cares about comfort. And consensus feels like security. If others think like you, then you're not alone. You're not crazy. You are validated. And so, when that illusion is broken, when someone challenges your views, you are not just disagreeing. You feel destabilized. You ask yourself, how can't they see what I see? The answer is simple. They weren't where you were. They did not live your life. They did not learn your language. They do not use your clothes. They did not survive your storms. Their mind was built of different bricks. Therefore, their conclusions differ. They are not incorrect, simply different. But the false consensus effect erases that difference. It assumes uniformity where none exists. And it turns disagreement to friction. It happens in groups. You say something in a meeting, assuming everyone agrees. Silence. You realize you were projecting. You assume the unsaid was shared, but it was not. It happens in relationships. You assume that your partner wants what you want, thinks like you do, and when they don't, you feel as if it were betrayal. But it is not betrayal, it is revelation. It happens on the internet. You create a feed that reflects you. The same opinions, the same jokes, the same outrage. And suddenly you believe that everyone thinks like that until something pierces the bubble and the contrast feels hostile. That is the danger. The false consensus effect creates echo chambers not only in social networks, but also in your mind. You stop looking for other voices. You stop imagining other lives. You are surprised when someone does not agree, and that surprise becomes judgment. They must be ignorant. They must be crazy. It must be evil. No. They're simply not like you. And the truth is that most people don't think like you. They do not want what you want. They do not value what you value. And that does not make them wrong. It makes them human, just like you. So, how do you escape this effect? You start with humility. You admit, my vision of the world is one of many. It is not the center, not the norm, just a perspective among billions. You carry it with pride, but without superiority. You ask more questions, not to trap or win, but to understand, to see the scaffolding behind another person's beliefs, the paths they took to reach a different truth. Resist the urge to generalize. An opinion is not consensus. A publication is not a trend. A conversation is not a representative sample. Maintain curiosity. Keep an open mind. And when disagreement arises, don't back down. Do not discard. You do not react, but listen. You let discomfort sharpen empathy, because the goal is not to live in a world where everyone agrees. The objective is to see with clarity. And sometimes clarity begins when you stop assuming that you are surrounded by reflections and realize you are standing in a room full of strangers. You believe that things will turn out well. Maybe not for everyone, but for you. You will overcome the probabilities. You will avoid the accident. You will get the job. Your relationship will last. You will stay healthy. It will not be you. The one who gets divorced, the one who is fired, the one who gets sick. You know the risks, but deep down you believe that it will not happen to you. This is the optimistic bias. The tendency to believe that you are more likely to experience positive results and less likely to face negative results compared to other people. It is not hope. It is not confidence. It is a cognitive distortion, an inclination in the lens that makes the future seem brighter when it is your future, and it is persistent. Even when they show you the numbers, even when the statistics are cold and clear, your brain whispers, "I will be the exception." You recognize the risk, but you don't feel it. You say, "I know that smoking causes cancer, but I am reducing consumption. I know that emerging companies fail, but mine is different. I know that marriages break, but we are not like them." That disconnection is the optimism bias, the gap between what you know and what you think will happen anyway. And it is everywhere. You see it in finance. People underestimate their chances of getting into debt. They overestimate the performance of their investments. They believe they will save more, earn more before retirement than is realistic. The spreadsheets say one thing, and the story they have in their head says another. You see it in health. You delay medical checkups, ignore symptoms, take risks. You believe that diseases are for other people. The diagnosis, the accident, the emergency, that is for strangers until it is your turn. You see it in behavior. You send text messages while driving because you probably won't have an accident. You don't put on sunscreen because you probably won't get skin cancer. You enter a toxic situation thinking that you will be the one who changes it, who survives, who comes out unscathed. But your belief in immunity does not change the probabilities. And that is the lie. The optimistic bias does not protect you. It exposes you. It makes you be poorly prepared. You don't save for emergencies. You don't have difficult conversations. You don't check the facts because your instinct has already told you how the story ends, and your instinct is biased. But here is the twist. The optimistic bias is not all bad. It keeps you moving. It gives you energy. It fuels ambition. Without it, maybe you would never take risks, never try, never build. If you waited for failure, you would never get off the ground. So the bias motivates and elevates you. But if you don't recognize it, it blinds you. It convinces you that effort guarantees results, that good intentions guarantee success, that being careful makes you invincible and turns life into a game in which you think you are playing with a secret advantage. It is not like that. So, how do you keep the light without losing control? First, learn to separate optimism from illusion. You can believe in a good future and, at the same time, plan for the worst. You can dream with an open eye. You can say, "I hope it works, and I will prepare in case it doesn't." Secondly, keep track of your predictions. Write them down. Test your assumptions. Did the calendar coincide with reality? Did your plan anticipate the setbacks? Did you see the obstacles or only the destination? Third, listen to the resistance. That part of you that says, "What if this goes wrong?" Do not silence it. Do not label it as negative. Let's speak, because sometimes the voice of doubt is just the voice of preparation. And lastly, respect uncertainty. You are not the exception. You are not the chosen one. You are not immune. And that does not make you weak. It makes you human like everyone else who hopes for the best, walking in the dark with one foot in a dream and the other on the ground. The optimistic bias says that things will go well for me. Wisdom says that maybe yes, but I will be prepared if it is not like that. You say that you will take an hour. You start confidently, focused, and motivated. Then, the hour passes and you have done nothing. You have underestimated yourself again. And you are not the only one. This is the planning fallacy, the lie inherent in the mind that things will go faster, easier than they really are. It is not just an illusion or wishful thinking. It is a systematic bias. We plan starting from the best possible scenario. We imagine ideal conditions, without interruptions, without fatigue, without resistance. We forget how long similar tasks took in the past. We say that this time will be different, and then it isn't. You say that you will write the report in 2 days, that you will finish the renovation in a month, that you will launch the business at the end of the year. You plan everything, set deadlines, block the calendar, but you do not take into account reality, the distractions, the delays, complexity that you did not see coming. You plan for what should happen, not for what usually happens. And then, when the deadline passes, you blame yourself. You think you're lazy, inefficient, slow, but you are not. You're only trapped in a trap in which almost everyone falls because the planning fallacy is not about how you work. It is about how you imagine the work. And imagination is dangerously optimistic. Compress time. You forget how much time transitions take, how long tiredness lasts. You assume that you will be at your best always. You imagine your future self as more disciplined, focused, and capable. You forget that your future self will be as human as you are now. Eliminate setbacks. You don't plan for the days when you'll feel bad, the nights when you won't sleep, for the people who won't respond to emails, for the technology that will break down, for revisions, for emotional resistance. Your plan is a straight line, but the road will be tortuous. Ignore the past. You have done similar things before. It took you longer. They were more difficult. But somehow this time it feels different. You are sure that you have learned the lesson, but that lesson, realistic deadlines, is the one we resist most. And this fallacy has consequences. It creates pressure. You promise something for Friday, but don't deliver. Now you rush, take shortcuts, and lose sleep. Or even worse, you deliver late and ashamed, blaming your character when the real culprit was the plan. It kills the impulse. You feel behind and disappointed. What was once a hopeful project becomes a burden. You start to resent what you once looked forward to. It damages trust. You tell others what they want to hear. I'll have it ready by next week. You believe it. But when you miss it again and again, people stop believing you. Not because you lied, but because you are optimistic. It distorts ambition. You assume more than you can handle. You start 5 things and finish none. Your to-do list becomes a graveyard of well-intentioned lies. So how do you combat it? First, use historical data. How long it really took you to do similar tasks. Not what you expected, but what happened. If you normally underestimate by 50%, incorporate it into your plan. Second, plan in layers. The best case, the most likely, and the worst. Treat the most likely as your real estimate. Let the best case die on paper so it doesn't die in real time. Third, divide the task. Writing a book is not a task, is 50 tasks. Estimate each part. Add buffer time. Expect setbacks. Don't just schedule the work, schedule the recovery. And fourth, forgive the adjustments. When the deadline is extended, don't call it failure. Call it the truth catching up. Adjust the calendar. Keep going. The shame of delay does more damage than the delay itself. Because this is the deepest truth. The planning fallacy is not a failure of discipline. It is a failure of imagination. You imagine a future without frictions, then live in a world that is. But the objective of planning is not to predict the perfect path. It is to leave space for reality. Fantasy says, I will finish this quickly. Wisdom says, I will finish this honestly. An honest time is always better than imaginary speed. You think you are remembering impartially, but you are only remembering what's recent. You think you're judging the whole, but you are only reacting to the end. The recency effect distorts memory by its weight, not its truth. The final impression, the last word, the closing tone. These are the fragments to which your mind clings while everything before fades. A good ending makes everything seem better than it was. A bad one erases all previous value. It is not logic, it is proximity. The last thing that touched your mind is what resonates most. You leave a conversation after an uncomfortable silence, and the entire interaction becomes uncomfortable in your memory. You see a movie that stumbles in its final act, and now the whole story feels broken. You spend months working on something, but the last chaotic days sour the process. Your brain does not evaluate linearly. It compresses the entire timeline into the final moment, wraps it in emotion, and saves that version. You think you are remembering what happened. You are remembering how it ended. This not only distorts memory, but also decisions. You trust the people who caused a good last impression, not those who were consistently kind. You promote someone who performed well on the last day, not the one who quietly led the team for months. You forgive the patterns and punish the moments. You misjudge integrity, quality, and effort because the recency effect deceives your judgment, dressing recent events as the absolute truth. The distortion appears everywhere. A vacation can be perfect until the last flight goes wrong, and now it seems like a disaster. A relationship can be stable for years, but a fight near the end poisons the entire memory. A speaker can stumble in the last sentence, and the public forgets the previous 90 minutes of brilliance. People do not remember the balance. They remember the climax. They remember the collapse. The recency effect does not care what is accurate. It cares about what still resonates in your ears. It also works in reverse. A strong ending can cover up failure. A clean conclusion can disguise inconsistency. If someone apologizes well, their behavior becomes easier to ignore. If a project ends successfully, the stress that built it becomes justified. If the final report looks good, the dysfunction behind it is erased. You do not see the disaster. You see the tape at the top. You see the end. And you confuse the end with quality. Memory is not a diary. It is not complete. It does not distribute space fairly. It keeps the most outstanding. And the most outstanding is always the most recent thing. That is why apologies matter more than explanations. That is why the tone you use to finish a conversation shapes the memory more than what was actually said. That is why the last 10 seconds of an experience can overwrite the previous hours. The end becomes the whole, even when the whole contradicts the end. This bias affects how you see yourself. You forget months of discipline after one night of failure. You forget weeks of progress for a single relapse. You define yourself by the most recent version of your weakness, not by the longest pattern of your strength. You stand in front of your complete history, ignore 90% of it, and let the last mistake decide your value. So you stay stuck. You feel ashamed for something that was just a moment. You ignore the growth because the last stretch felt more difficult. You make long-term decisions based on short-term emotions. You sabotage consistency with a single peak of doubt, not because you are irrational, but because your memory system is biased to prioritize the edge, not the shape. The recency effect feeds impatience. It makes you give up early. You launch a project, and the response is not instantaneous, so you assume that it has failed. You have an uncomfortable day, and you consider a friendship broken. You spend years building something, and you throw it away because the last week was not entirely good. You judge everything by the last seconds, and you think you're being honest, but you're only deceiving yourself. The only defense is structure. Keep track of reality, not impressions. Look back and read what you wrote in real time. Analyze the process, not just the end. Remind yourself that the end is not the whole movie. You refuse to make permanent decisions based on temporal proximity. You slow down your conclusions, you pause before reconfiguring your self-esteem around a last-minute stumble. You get caught in that loop, that one in which you say, maybe none of that mattered. That phrase is the recency effect speaking. That phrase is a lie. What mattered was not how it ended. What mattered is that you showed up. You built, you pushed, you did something real. And even if the final note broke, the song was still yours. You become what they expect. Not because they told you, because they forced you, but because they looked at you in a certain way, they spoke to you in a certain way, they waited for you to get up, and so you did. Not by pressure, by reflection, by something deeper than obedience. A silent agreement that became transformation. That is the Pylonian effect, the psychological phenomenon in which higher expectations lead to better performance. The belief projected on you from the outside begins to shape the inside. It does not take orders. It does not accept orders, only attention, only consistency. Only someone who treats you as if you were already who you are supposed to become. And in that environment, you will adapt. You strive to reach the form that is expected. You put in effort. You focus more. You show a discipline that you did not know existed. Not because someone pushed you, but because someone believed in you before you proved it. This is not magic. It is not motivation. It is structure. The expectations are not neutral. They influence behavior. They give shape to the feedback loops. A teacher who believes a student is gifted dedicates more time to them, gives more feedback, and makes more eye contact. A leader who believes that an employee has potential assigns him more difficult tasks, trusts him more quickly, listens to him with more attention. The receiver responds not out of favoritism, but because belief creates space, and space creates growth. But the effect is bidirectional. The opposite is also true. Low expectations diminish people. They make them doubt, silence them, and undermine them. If someone treats you as incompetent, you doubt your simplest actions. If someone assumes that you will fail, you become cautious, indirect, and reluctant to try. The environment becomes dense and performance suffers, not because of capacity, but because the room feels colder. This is not theory. It is repeatable. In education, randomly assigning students as likely outstanding led teachers to expect more from them. And those randomly chosen students really improved, not because they were smarter, but because they were treated as if they could be. The same rules apply in relationships. If they love you as trustworthy, you become more honest. If they speak to you as intelligent, your thoughts sharpen. If they consider you strong and you find the strength not through manipulation, but through reflection, because the way others see you becomes a mirror, and over time you adjust to it. But it is fragile, because once expectation becomes pressure, the effect breaks down. It only works when belief is silent, when trust is implicit, when the space is safe, not demanding. The Pygmalion effect is not about forcing results. It is about nurturing potential. The danger lies in forgetting that you're always sending signals. The way you greet someone, the way you ask questions, the way you react to their answers, you are communicating what you expect, and they receive it even if they don't say it, especially when they don't say it. You think you're being neutral, but there is no neutrality. Each look is building or withdrawing. Each silence opens or closes. Each assumption is scaffolding or sabotage. So how can this be used? Start by looking at your posture, tone, and reflexes when someone fails. Do you treat mistakes as part of growth or as confirmation of doubt? Do you offer second chances as if they mattered or as a punishment? Do you think someone can rise, or do you just hope they don't fall? You don't need to flatter. You need to wait. You don't need to inflate. You need to see. And you need to show that you see, not with great speeches, but with constant confidence, with a consistent space, with a faith that does not collapse under the weight of imperfection. And you need to apply it to yourself, because the voice in your head is the first source of expectation to which you respond. If you expect to fail, you will fail, no doubt. If you expect to stumble, walk with caution. If you expect to be ignored, stop talking. But if you expect to grow, learn, endure, adapt, then your behavior changes, not because you know the result, but because the conditions for movement are in place. The Pygmalion effect is not about pretending. It is about molding the atmosphere until the person fits the mold. And when belief becomes consistent, internal or external, form becomes reality. Silence in a room does not mean agreement. It does not mean peace. It does not mean that the idea is good. Silence often means fear. It means pressure. It means that everyone looked around and decided that it is safer to remain silent than to say what they really think. This is how group thinking begins, not as a failure of thought, but as a surrender to the atmosphere. A group does not need to convince you. It only needs to nod. It only needs everyone else to speak before you. It only needs the appearance of consensus. And before you know it, your opinion folds like a paper crane in the rain. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. And humans are programmed to sink to belong, to stay within the rhythm. And standing out seems like a risk. Group thinking is not collective intelligence. It is collective avoidance of conflict. It is agreement without analysis, alignment without questions, a decision made not because it is correct, but because it is easy, because it does not disturb, because it keeps the water calm. In any room full of people, most do not say what they mean. They say what is acceptable, what will not make them be judged, what keeps them inside. And with each silent disagreement, the space shrinks. Ideas narrow. Questions become threats. What began as collaboration becomes an invisible cage of approval. Group thinking is not perceived as coercion. It is perceived as order, as discipline, as maturity. But underneath lies the fear of rupture, the fear of friction, the fear of being the one who asks, "Are we sure of this?" It kills innovation. It kills critical thinking. It kills progress. Decisions are made that nobody really supports, simply because nobody wanted to be the first to resist. And once the decision is made, everyone nods. Everyone accepts. Everyone forgets that they never really agreed. Group thinking does not need a leader. It only needs silence. The kind of silence in which mistakes accumulate, because nobody was willing to be the first to ask if we are walking toward a wall. And when everything falls apart, people ask how it happened, how nobody saw it, how nobody said anything. And the answer is that everyone expected someone else to do it. Nobody wanted to break the rhythm, but the rhythm was wrong. Group thinking is detected when agreement comes too soon, when disagreement seems dangerous, when discomfort hides behind professionalism, when nobody asks difficult questions. No one stirs the waters. No one touches sacred assumptions. No one challenges the defect at the center, and everything seems calm, and everything keeps moving. But in reality, everyone is simply walking in circles. Group thinking does not explode. It erodes. It detaches the space for thinking layer by layer. It turns dialogue into a mirror. You don't hear ideas. You hear your own reflection. You don't hear the truth. You hear what has been filtered for security. And security, instead of truth, is rot. How does it break? You don't go to war with the group, but you don't surrender to its gravity. You speak when there is silence. You ask when everyone nods. You grant yourself the right to doubt and the courage to say it aloud. Because the truth is never as strong as consensus, but weighs more when it lands. You show someone clear, direct, and undeniable proof. You expect them to change their mind. It doesn't. They entrench themselves. They reaffirm themselves. They reject the evidence and defend the belief even more strongly than before. You have not won the discussion. You have made it worse. That is the counterproductive effect. The phenomenon by which correcting misinformation does not fix the lie. It strengthens it. This is not ignorance. It is defense of identity. Beliefs are not stored as files. They are interwoven into what we are. When you attack the belief, you attack the person. And the person responds as if they were besieged, not with logic but with shields. Facts do not matter if they threaten the self. When someone deeply believes in something about politics, religion, morality, or even medicine, your correction is not neutral. It feels like a betrayal, like an assault. The brain treats it like pain. Therefore, it responds with reflexes, rejects, discredits, denies. The mind closes the door before the truth can enter. And it is not a defect of stupid people. It is not lack of education. It happens to everyone. The smarter you are, the better you defend false beliefs. You build stronger walls. You rationalize faster. You use intelligence as a weapon to keep truth out. Because the truth, if it threatens your core, feels like violence. The counterproductive effect needs no lies to survive. It needs only emotions. The more charged the belief, the more resistant it becomes. You don't just believe it, you feel it. You link it to your family, your identity, your sense of control. And when that's at stake, evidence becomes irrelevant. You don't evaluate it, you defend yourself from it. It happens during debates. You present the data. They question its source. You quote the experts. They find other experts. You provide some studies. They find the holes. The goal isn't clarity. It is about survival. To win out. Preserve belief at all costs. It happens in families. Someone brings up a hard truth. Abuse, addiction, denial. Instead of facing it, the family member rewrites the past, minimizes the projects, turns the accuser into an enemy. Not because they don't care, but facing it would destroy their world image. It happens constantly within politics. A leader is caught in lying. The facts are quite evident. The damage is quantifiable, but followers remain firm or get louder because changing their mind in public feels like betrayal. Because admitting truth means admitting that you were deceived, and pride won't allow it. The counterproductive effect makes truth a threat, and that threat becomes just noise. So what should you do? You don't argue more strongly now. You don't throw more facts out. That's like throwing water on grease fire. It just spreads. You try to create space. You lower the overall volume. You go from confrontation into conversation. You ask instead of telling. You invite doubt, don't impose it. You create security because nobody updates beliefs while feeling attacked. People don't open minds when they prepare for pain. You model some uncertainty. You say, I used to believe that too. You say, I may well be wrong. You say, this is what made me change my own mind. And sometimes they follow, not because you destroyed their belief, but because you show them a way out. But sometimes they simply won't. And that's the truth you must swallow. Some people prefer burning the bridge before crossing. Some people prefer defending a lie to admitting truth because a lie feels safer, warmer, more their own. And that is not your fault. It is the structure of belief. You don't always manage to break it. But if you sow doubt delicately, in silence, if you let it settle without forcing it, it could grow. Not today, nor tomorrow, but perhaps later, when defenses fall, when the need to be right calms, when the cost of denial becomes too heavy. Until then, remember that truth is patient, but belief is stubborn. You believe that the truth is enough, that if someone is wrong and you show them the facts, the real facts from credible sources, they will understand it. They will change, they will thank you. But that is not how it works. Not in the brain, not in the body, not in the bloodstream of belief. Because the facts don't simply land, they crash. And sometimes they don't simply bounce, they dig a deeper hole. This is the counterproductive effect, the reverse march of reason, the moment when being corrected makes someone believe even more strongly in their original idea. Not because he is stupid, but because he is defending something that he cannot afford to lose. His identity, his image of the world, his story of who he is. And at that moment, the truth becomes the enemy. It's not about information. It's about the ego. It's about territory. It's about threat. You show them the data, and their mind pulls the emergency brake. Not because it is false, but because it is foreign. The brain does not evaluate it. It resists, like a body that rejects an organ that does not match its blood type, like a wall that repels heat, like a closed hand that tightens the more you try to open it. You see it everywhere. You show someone that a political statement is false. They respond with another link, another meme, another twist. They do not move. They do not move. They deepen. They say the source is biased. They say you're being manipulated. They say that this is fake news, not because they have investigated, but because it does not fit, and what does not fit must be denied. You talk to someone who believes in a conspiracy theory. You explain the science to them. You explain the probability to them. You explain the holes in the logic. But it does not collapse. It expands. Now the people you quote are part of the cover-up. The facts are part of the illusion. The correction is the proof. Every attempt to fix the belief becomes another reason to believe it. You try to help a friend who is in denial about a partner, a habit, their own self-destruction. You tell them what is happening. They nod. They smile. Then they return to the story that is killing them. Not because they have not listened to you, but because your version of the world does not feel safe. And security always wins over precision. That is what makes the counterproductive effect so brutal. Not only does it resist the truth, but it turns it into a weapon. It turns the correction into fuel. It turns the attempt to help into an act of aggression. You have not saved them. You have made them sink more. Because you have not touched the belief, you have touched the core, and the core defends itself. The counterproductive effect is not rare. It is not a failure. It is how belief works under pressure. When identity is threatened, the mind does not ask itself, is this true? It asks itself, am I safe? It asks itself, am I stupid? It asks itself, am I being deceived? And to protect itself, it answers, no, they are wrong. I am right. They are lying. I am awake. The moment a belief becomes personal, it becomes sacred. And sacred beliefs are not updated. They are defended even against reality. And the smarter you are, the worse it is. Because intelligence is not immunity, it is armor. You do not use it to see more clearly. You use it to justify faster, to find counterarguments, to select evidence, and build walls with logic. You think more, but you do not think better. You dig better trenches. And the more public the belief is, the harder it is to let it go. You said it out loud. You tweeted it. You taught it. You defended it in front of others. Now changing means admitting that you were wrong, undoing the public version of yourself. And that kind of reversal does not feel like growth. It feels like humiliation. So you do not do it. You do not change. You persist, and each correction that comes after does not soften you. It hardens you. It confirms the feeling that the world is against you, that people are against you, that your belief must be true because it is being attacked. The truth does not feel like pressure. Lies do. So if you feel pressure, maybe you are onto something. That is how it works. That is how it traps. The counterproductive effect is the reason why debates rarely end in agreement. Why families are divided by ideologies. Why does the comment section never change anyone's opinion? Because nobody listens to learn. They listen to survive. So what do? You don't fight harder. You stop fighting. You stop pushing facts as if they were weapons. You start asking better questions. You open space. You let people feel safe enough to soften. You say, I used to think the same. You say, what made you believe that? You say, what would make you change your mind? And you say it without deceptions, because they can smell deception. You don't build a trap. You build a chair. You sit down, you talk, you model uncertainty. You tell the truth about your own changes. Not to prove a point, but to show that change doesn't have to feel like death. And sometimes they will listen. Sometimes they will shudder. Sometimes they go home and feel alone where there is no noise. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they harden. They throw you out. They call you blind, puppet, fool, and you want to scream to correct with more force to flood them with data, but it doesn't work because the fire is already burning, and that's when you breathe, you let yourself go, you remember that beliefs don't die in the discussions. They die in silence, in slow and quiet rooms, in long sleepless nights when certainty begins to crack. You can't force that. You can only plant the seed. The truth is not a hammer. It is a mirror, and sometimes people are not prepared to look. You stay where you are not because it is the right thing to do, not because it works, but because it is already there. It is already chosen, already familiar, already underway. And your brain tells you that it is enough. It tells you that the current path, however flawed it may be, is safer than any new one. It tells you that disruption is danger, that stillness is wisdom, that the worst thing you could do is change. And you believe it. This is the status quo bias, the cognitive tendency to prefer things as they are, to defend the default, to overvalue the present condition simply because it exists, not because it is better, not because it is rational, but because it is established, because it is already rooted, because questioning it is like shaking the ground under your feet. And the more time you spend with it, the stronger it holds you. The longer the habit lasts, the heavier the anchor, the deeper the routine, the thicker the walls. You don't even call it choice anymore. You simply call it life. You stay in systems that no longer serve you. You no longer defend processes that you stop believing in. You support traditions that you never chose. You repeat patterns that exhaust you, not because they are correct, but because they are yours, because abandoning them would imply facing the unknown. And your mind hates the unknown more than dysfunction. You defend what is killing you because it is familiar to you. You stay in jobs that exhaust you. You convince yourself it's not that bad. You tell yourself that it's just a bad streak, a phase, a temporary imbalance. You forget that years have passed. You forget that you said the same thing 12 months ago. You forget that all the reasons you give are just a way to protect a decision that you made a long time ago and you have never reevaluated. You stay in relationships that leave you empty. You say that it's complicated. You say that you've invested too much. You say that nobody's perfect. You say that maybe it's you. You say that it's safer to stay than start over. You don't call it fear. You call it loyalty. You stay in belief systems that don't align with you. You repeat ideas that you no longer feel. You recite values that don't fit. You perform rituals that you do not understand because they are yours, because they instilled them in you since you were little. And the cost of changing them now feels like betrayal. The status quo bias doesn't argue with you. It doesn't push you. It doesn't scream. It whispers to you. It tells you that it's easier to leave things as they are. That change is chaos. That the effort is useless. That the friction of transformation is greater than the pain of stagnation. And the more time you let it speak, the more it sounds like reason. It does not matter that the status quo is failing, that your agenda is crushing you, that your body is sending signals, that your mind is tired, that your future is claustrophobic. You say to yourself, that's life. That's how it works. This is what it means to be responsible, mature, disciplined, stable. You turn resignation into a virtue. You don't ask yourself if your habits make sense. You don't ask yourself if your values are still yours. You don't ask yourself if your path is still aligned. You ask yourself, how can I move forward without shaking the foundations? You reinforce the walls that are already cracked. You silence the voice that says, this isn't working. And even when something better appears, even when you see the opportunity, even when the new path is clearer, brighter, more alive, you doubt. Not because the new path is worse, but because it's new, because it's not yet underway. Because choosing it would require admitting that the previous path was a mistake. The status quo bias not only protects comfort, it protects the ego. It makes you defend your previous decisions, even when they no longer deserve your loyalty. It makes you defend things that you would not choose today. It makes you identify with choices that no longer reflect who you are. It tells you not to fix what is not broken, but it also tells you not to fix what is, as long as it's familiar. You stop innovating. You stop questioning. You stop adapting. You stop imagining. You call it realism, but it is structured fear, justified and reinforced by time. You forget that the status quo was once a choice, a moment of decision, a selection between options. And now you treat it as if it were destiny. And every day, you reinforce it. Each time, it is more difficult to see beyond. You don't measure the cost of staying put. You don't calculate the opportunity lost. You only see the risk of disruption, not the risk of erosion. You compare the chaos of change with a false peace of permanence. And permanence always wins until it doesn't. Until it collapses, until the system breaks, until your health fails, until your mind fractures, until your life becomes a silent panic that extends for years. Then how do you move on? You start by realizing that. You name the bias itself. You stop calling it reality. You say, this that I am doing it because it is already here. You admit that impulse is not a test. That familiarity is not a value. That the default isn't the truth. Escape the difficult questions. Would I choose this again now? If I met this person today, would I still commit? If I started this job tomorrow, would I still accept it? If I discovered this belief now, would I still adopt it? And when the answer is no, you don't run. You don't get scared easily. You pause now. You recognize that not all defaults deserve loyalty. You don't need to spoil everything now. You don't need to start over. But you do need to awaken. You need to stop defending decisions made by a version of you that no longer exists. You give yourself permission to change without shame or apologies. You remember that status quo isn't neutral. It is active now. It is alive now. It is shaping you each day. And if you don't shape it, it will harden around you like a shell. The bias says, let it be. But growth says it doesn't have to continue like this. And freedom begins with that phrase. You explain something to someone else. For you, it's obvious, clear, basic, but they don't understand. They look at you with bewilderment. You repeat it more slowly, louder, but they still don't understand. You get frustrated now. You wonder if they're not paying attention, if they're not trying, but the problem is not him. It is you. You have forgotten what it's like not to know. This is the curse of knowledge, the cognitive bias, making it hard to remember how it felt before understanding. Once you know, you can't unlearn it. You lose the ability to imagine the mental state of someone who doesn't understand it. And that loss distorts your way of communicating, teaching, leading, connecting. You take things for granted now. You skip steps. You use a language that is familiar to you, but foreign to others. You rush. You are condescending. You blame them for being slow. When the truth is that you have gone too fast because knowledge has changed your brain. It has reconfigured the path. It made things seem simpler than they are. Not because they became simple, but because your mind has automated the complexity and you now forget how much effort it took to climb the hill. You're standing on top, shouting instructions to someone who has not even found the start of the path. The curse of knowledge is not about arrogance. It is about blindness. A specific, structured blindness towards the gap between what you know and what others do not know. And the wider that gap is, the more difficult it is to see. You explain a system and assume they already know the basics. You give advice and assume they have tried everything you have. You write an email, a lesson, a manual, a speech, and it all makes sense to you. But there is the trap. You're not the audience. And the further you get in any field, science, art, philosophy, finance, education, the stronger the curse becomes, because the more fluent you are, the less effort it costs you to navigate the concepts. You do not stop to translate. You do not reduce the speed. You do not feel the friction that they feel because you have forgotten that it once existed. And so, without realizing it, you become more difficult to understand. You touch with less clarity. You explain with less effectiveness. You connect less deeply, not because you have lost contact, but because your contact is now automatic. And automatic things are invisible. You see in the teachers who speak above their students, in the experts who write instructions that no one can follow, in the leaders who believe they are being clear but leave everyone confused, in the parents who say it is obvious and the children who feel ashamed to ask. You see it in friendships, in relationships, in the moments in which someone is going through difficulties, and you offer them a solution that makes them feel stupid, not because the solution is incorrect, but because it is beyond their reach, because it assumes a level of clarity that they do not yet have, because it skips the confusion. The curse of knowledge kills empathy. It turns communication into a performance. It makes you forget the path you have traveled and replaces memory with impatience. So what do? You go slower. You rewind. You imagine yourself before you knew. You imagine the moment when this concept, this tool, this truth was new to you. And you remember how you felt, not only the facts, the disorientation, the doubt, the moments when nothing made sense. You go back there, not to stay, but to translate. You break the idea down into pieces. You explain the background. You name the assumptions. You walk step by step without rushing to the end. And when someone doesn't understand, you don't see it as resistance. You see it as a sign, a mirror, a reminder that you have come so far that you forgot the beginning. You listen not only to the question, but to the confusion behind it. You not only clarify, you deconstruct. You remove the layers of your own fluidity until the foundations become visible again, because clarity is not about being intelligent. It is about being accessible. And wisdom is not how much you know, it is how well you remember what it is not to know. The curse of knowledge says that this is easy, but empathy says that we start from where you are, and real intelligence, real connection begins there. You don't realize when it happens. You think you've made a decision, followed a thought, and reached a conclusion because it made sense, because it seemed right to you. But what came before that moment shaped it. A word, a smell, a tone, a look, a subtle sign in your environment that has tilted everything slightly, and you haven't even noticed. That is the priming effect. It is not a push or an order, just a small nudge that diverts the entire mind a few degrees from its course without it being noticed. You enter a room that smells of cleaning product and then report higher levels of moral disgust. You read the word slow in a sentence and then walk more slowly without realizing why. You hold a hot drink and describe a stranger as friendly. You hold a cold drink and describe the same person as distant. The mind constantly captures signs, some obvious, others microscopic, and then builds meaning on them. Not because the signs are strong, but because the system's automatic. The priming effect works below consciousness. It is not suggestion. It is not intention. It is architecture, a plan of the context that shapes your internal climate before you have the opportunity to look at the sky. And by the time you feel the wind, the system has already changed. You feel safe, and you call it certainty. You feel anxious, and you call it intuition. You feel determined, and you think it is clarity. But each of those feelings is anchored in something that came before, something you didn't choose. something that may not even be relevant. It's not about logic. It's about exposure. You hear a sound. You see a shape. You read a word. You see an image. This prepares the system, activates a network of associations, evokes feelings, expectations, ideas, all faster than conscious thought. And then those activated pathways influence everything that follows: your decisions, your judgments, your behavior, your tone, your sense of control. You're asked to guess someone's age after seeing the word old. You are asked to complete a sentence after reading a violent story. You are asked to measure your pain after seeing the word sharp. You are asked to evaluate your own confidence after passing in front of a mirror. And you think that you are evaluating only the question, but it is not like that. You are responding to the entire environment. And most of that environment lives outside your field of conscious vision. This is not rare. This is not extreme. This is not marginal. This is constant. Repetition prepares memory. Language prepares behavior. Color prepares the state of mind. Posture prepares emotion. Music prepares decision-making. Facial expressions prepare confidence. Symbols prepare fear. Even numbers can prepare generosity, aggression, or risk tolerance, depending on what they are combined with. The problem is not that this happens. The problem is that you forget that it's happening. You forget that each thought, opinion, conclusion is a consequence of a torrent of invisible stimuli. You forget that you're not starting from scratch. You are reacting to a landscape that was drawn for you before you open your eyes. It works in advertising. You see a logo associated with luxury, and now you feel braver. You see a slogan about speed, and now you feel impatient. You see a product next to family images, and now it seems like something personal to you. You are not evaluating the product. You are evaluating the network of meanings that have been attributed to it, by repetition, by design, by exposure. It works in politics. Certain phrases repeated trigger reactions: freedom, security, threat, control. Entire campaigns are built not around arguments, but around repeated priming, not to change your values, but to make you feel as if your values were being activated. And once that network lights up, every idea that follows adds to that current. It works in the media. Stories are organized to create emotional rhythms. Headlines are written to activate specific fears. The words are chosen to set the tone even before the facts arrive. The sequence in which information is transmitted changes how it arrives. And your conclusions are based not only on the facts, but on the mental state you were in when the facts reached you. It works in conversation. Someone starts a sentence with a specific tone, and your body adapts. You sit forward or lean back. You expect a fight or compliment. You are prepared for a type of interaction. You start to shape your response before they finish speaking, and you think you are present, but you're being dragged at works on yourself. You look at your phone. The first image affects how you interpret the next five. A message prepares your memory for an emotion. A word prepares your perception of another person's tone. An emoji prepares your idea of their intention. None of this is neutral. Everything is color-coded before it reaches you. And it doesn't matter if you know it. Being aware does not override the effect. Knowing about priming does not prevent it from working. You may know that seeing the word rude will make you interrupt faster and still interrupt faster. You may know that reading about old age slows your body and still slow you down. The process is deeper than intellect. It lives in layers beneath logic. So what is the cost? The cost is attribution. You feel a reaction and assign it to the wrong source. You think you were upset because someone was late, but it started when you read an incisive headline. You think you trust someone because they smiled, but it started because you had a hot cup in your hands. You think you're motivated by your goals, but it started with a certain song, a certain word, a certain light. You become the echo of a context that you have not designed. And if you don't keep track of the inputs, you start to believe that the outputs are who you are, but they are not. They define where you are. So what should you do? You reduce your speed. You rewind it. You ask yourself, what did I just read? What did I just hear? What was the room temperature? What was the conversation's rhythm? What image was on the wall? Gather the fragments that give form to the way in which you are. You name what's invisible. You reduce exposure to unwanted influences. You stop scrolling before sleep. You control the first image seen when waking. You enter a room and adjust it. Lights, smells, sounds, because you know they'll adjust you. You create your own priming. You write words and you place them where your mind will run into them, not to control you, but to balance the scale. You stop pretending that thoughts arrive completely formed. You accept that each thought is the result of the mathematics of the environment. And once you know that, you can recalculate. You can design the inputs. You can reset the trigger. You can install your own context instead of inheriting someone else's. Because priming is not only vulnerability, it is power. It is the power to give form to the state of mind, the attention, the energy, and that power is constantly used against you. So use it too with care, in silence, deliberately. Because the only real defense against unconscious influence is not resistance, but authorship. You know someone charming, well-dressed, and self-confident. You like the way he speaks. You like the way he behaves. And before you realize it, your brain completes the rest. They must be intelligent, kind, honest, capable. You project qualities that you have not seen based on the few that you've seen. That is the halo effect, the mental shortcut converting a positive trait into a complete character. You see someone attractive and assume they're also intelligent. You see someone eloquent and assume they're competent. You see someone popular and you assume that he is trustworthy, but there is no relationship. They aren't connected. They are assumptions stacked one atop another. Not because they are true, but because your mind prefers coherence. The brain hates uncertainty. It wants quick impressions. It wants simple narratives. It wants a person to be one thing, not fragments, contradictions, or a mixture. So when you like a part, it improves the whole. A glow is created. It creates a halo, and everything that halo touches becomes better than it is. You hire someone for charisma and overlook their inexperience. You trust someone's judgment because they seem sure, not because they've demonstrated anything. You excuse someone's mistakes because they were kind once. You buy from someone you like even when the product's bad. The halo effect makes people seem better than they are, but even worse, it makes bad things easier to ignore. You downplay warning signs. You despise warning signs. You rationalize the cracks because admitting the defect means adjusting the entire image, and your brain resists it. It wants to keep the image clean. It appears in courts. Attractive defendants are judged with more leniency. Witnesses who are sure of themselves are believed more easily. A suit and tie tip the balance, not because they should, but because of the halo around them. It appears in schools. Teachers expect more from students who are neat, polite, or enthusiastic and give them better grades, more attention, more praise. Not because they have earned it, but because the first impression left a mark, and that mark marked everything that came after. It is seen in relationships. You fall in love with someone's humor, and then their lies don't seem so bad. You admire someone's talent, and then their cruelty becomes forgivable. You think you're being loyal, but you are being manipulated. The halo blinds you. The effect is rapid. It happens in seconds. And once it forms, it is sticky, hard to shake off, hard to revise. Because updating the image means interrupting a story. And the brain protects stories even when they are wrong, even when they hurt, even when the truth is knocking. So how do you fight it? Slow down your judgment. Separate the traits. You ask, is this person really good at what I think they are, or am I just impressed by something? Do I have proof, or do I just have a feeling? You list the qualities. You treat each one separately. You don't let charm equal competence. You don't let beauty equal honesty. You don't let confidence equal wisdom. You get caught up in praise. When you say they are incredible, ask in what, be specific, be concrete. Admire what is real, not what is supposed. Review your prejudices and decisions, hiring, trust, and conflicts. Don't ask, do I like them? Ask, what have they done? What is the pattern? What is the history? You learn to love without halos, to trust without radiance, to see people as mixed because they are. And when you feel the shine forming, don't kill it. You simply narrow it down. You say, I like this part, but that doesn't mean I know the rest. Because the halo effect wants simplicity, but the truth is in the details. You remember something vividly, a conversation, a detail, a moment. You are sure it happened. You can describe it. You can feel it. You would swear to it, but it didn't happen, or it didn't happen like that. Or it happened, but not to you. Not like that. Not in that order. And when someone shows you the truth, it doesn't seem true. Your version seems stronger, more complete, more real. That is the effect of false memories. The brain's ability to create memories that seem authentic but are constructed, distorted, or completely invented. A lie is not necessary. Hypnosis isn't necessary. Trauma isn't necessary. Only time, repetition, and suggestion are necessary. The brain fills in gaps. It softens noise. It edits. It merges. It replaces. And it tells the new version as if it were fact. Not to deceive, but to preserve the story, to maintain the coherence of the self. You see an old photo and suddenly remember the day, even if the photo was mounted. You hear a story so often that you believe it happened to you. You see a documentary, and weeks later you remember its events as if they were your own experiences. You mix timelines. You assign wrong faces to the right moments. You say things like, "I will never forget it," but you already have. And what remains is a reconstruction. Memory is not a recorder. It is not a hard drive. It is not a camera. It is a process. Every time you remember something, you alter it. Each memory is a rewriting. And if you rewrite it enough, the edits become the new default. You tell the same story for years. Each time, a little more polished, a little more emotional, and a little more focused. You add what should have been there. You cut what doesn't fit. You make yourself seem braver, smarter, more justified. And, in the end, you forget the original. You remember the version that works. False memories don't seem weaker than true ones. They seem stronger. They come with clarity, emotion, and certainty. That is the trap. We assume that confidence means precision, but often the opposite does. The most vivid memories are sometimes the falsest because they've been rehearsed, reinforced, refined. What seems sharp is often synthetic. It happens in families. You and your brother remember the same event differently. Who said what? Who started the fight? Who took blame? You argue not because one of you lies, but because your brains built different stories. Your minds gave it meaning in different directions, and you both believe what you remember. It happens in relationships. One member of the couple remembers a warm conversation, but the other remembers it as cold. One remembers a promise, the other a vague suggestion. You repeat it in your head. You are sure. You throw in their face. But what you hold against them may not be fact. It may be a movie you've edited over time, frame by frame. It happens in the judicial system. Eyewitnesses give testimonies that are completely erroneous. People confess to crimes they have not committed because memories can be implanted, molded, and rehearsed until they seem true. Courts have been built and destroyed on false memories, not lies. The memory, and it happens inside you. You misremember your own intentions and words. You rewrite your own past. You create origin stories that justify who you are now. You omit details that do not fit your identity. You build a version of yourself that is internally coherent, even if objectively wrong. The brain is not trying to lie. It is trying to function. It is trying to simplify a whole life of chaos into a narrative that you can sustain, but that narrative is malleable. It dissolves, it changes every time you touch it. So, how do you live with this? You stop trusting memory. As if it were law, you stop using phrases like, "I know for a fact." You start saying, "as far as I remember." You keep your own memory with skepticism, with humility, with the understanding that your memory is not a safe, is a stage. You question the memories that hurt most, that justify anger, that explain resentment. You ask yourself, how many times have I repeated this? What have I added? What have I removed? You check the version you have built. You compare notes. You ask others how they remember it, not to prove anything, but to see how big the gap is. You wait for the gap. You respect the gap. And when someone tells you that you have misremembered, you don't get defensive. You listen. You ask yourself, is it possible that I have rewritten this? Not to erase your history, but to soften your certainty. Because sometimes the hardest truth is this: the story you are living may not be the one that happened. And the only way to grow is to let that possibility in. You triumph. You get the job, you receive praise, they tell you that you have done well, but something does not add up. You feel like a fraud, as if you had deceived everyone, as if you had been lucky, as if at any moment someone is going to realize. You smile, you give thanks, and you move on, but inside you're waiting for the collapse, waiting to be discovered. That is the imposter syndrome. It is not the absence of achievements, but the inability to internalize them. It doesn't matter how many titles you have, how much experience, how many tests. The feeling remains. You're not good enough. You don't belong. You're not as competent as they think. You assume that others have everything under control, that they know what they are doing, that you're the only one who is pretending, but that is not so. The feeling does not come from failure. It comes from success, a success in which you do not trust, a success that you think you have not earned. You think that you have slipped through a hole, that someone has made a mistake, that you are the exception to all the rules in which you supposedly fit. And as you don't feel good enough, you assume that success must be false. You justify all your achievements. You say it was an opportune moment, luck, that the others are a lower level. You cannot take responsibility without feeling guilty. Compliments make you feel uncomfortable. Promotions make you feel panic. Public recognition feels like exposure. The focus of attention feels like a threat. So you overdo things. You work even harder. You prepare even more. You check, then recheck. Study things you already know well. You pursue perfectionism. You stay quite late. You say yes too often. Not because you want to excel, but because you're terrified of failure. Because you believe a mistake will reveal the truth that you're hiding. But the truth you hide is not the truth, it's fear. And that fear distorts everything. You constantly compare yourself, not to see where you are, but to prove you don't belong. You notice the strengths of others while ignoring yours. You see someone speak confidently and assume they have more knowledge. You see someone publish quickly and assume they're more disciplined. You see someone receive attention and assume they're more deserving. You make every breeze smaller, every gap bigger. You submit to a shifting standard, one that you never chose, one that always remains out of reach. You think you have to know everything. That competence means certainty. That if you have questions, it is that you should not be qualified. That if something is difficult for you, it means that you are weak. That struggling means failure. And so, the moment something is difficult for you, you assume it's because you are an imposter, not because the task is hard. But this is a lie. The imposter syndrome convinces you effort is proof of incompetence. That not knowing something means you shouldn't be there. That asking for help proves you are not prepared. That success should feel easy if it is real. But success rarely feels easy. It feels like pressure, like responsibility, like a weight. And the more you grow, the more you strive, the more things become unknown. Which means that feeling like an imposter isn't a sign you're failing. It is a sign that you are evolving. Because the only people who never feel like imposters are those who never leave their comfort zones. Failure isn't proof that you are fake. It is proof that you're learning. And you are not alone. Almost all the people you admire have felt this. They simply did not show it. Because imposter syndrome is not shown outwardly. It hides behind the achievements, behind the composure, behind the competence. It manifests in the silent doubt, in the questioning, in apologizing too much, in staying small to avoid calling attention. It whispers that you do not deserve your place. But the only way to silence it is to keep sitting. You do not fix it by achieving more. You do not fix it by waiting to feel prepared. You fix it by realizing the voice and choosing to disobey it. You remind yourself that you are not the voice. You are not the panic. You are not the fear. You are the person who is doing the work anyway. You measure progress, not perfection. You value learning, not knowing. You accept that growth includes discomfort, and you keep going because imposters feign success. You, on the other hand, feel like an imposter while you keep having success. And that difference matters. That means you're not a fraud. It is a fracture, a gap between what you have done and what you allow yourself to believe. And the only way to close it is to keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Keep sitting in the chair until the voice loses power. And finally, you realize that you have been real all along. You do something good. You help. You donate. You say the correct thing. You resist the impulse. And after that, You give yourself permission. Not consciously, not aloud, but silently. You allow yourself. If you take shortcuts, you become more forgiving of yourself. Not because you stopped caring, but because you feel you have earned it. That is moral license. The psychological effect in which past moral behavior makes you more prone to immoral or questionable behavior in the future. Goodness becomes a token, and once you have spent it, you spend yourself. You eat healthy all day, so at night you give yourself a binge. You go up the stairs once, and then use the elevator all week. You say to yourself, I did well. And that story becomes currency, and the currency demands to be used. You defend someone in public, you publish the correct opinion, you call yourself an ally, and now, when you make a small offensive comment, you downplay it. I have already demonstrated that I am not like that. You grant yourself moral immunity based on your moral history, as if decency could be deposited in a bank. You donate to a cause. You share a campaign. You point out your values. And then you ignore your own bias. You despise the pain of others. You feel you have fulfilled your part, so now you are exempt. You have complied with the minimum, so now the maximum is someone else's job. This is the lie of moral progress, that a correct act compensates for future incorrect ones. That virtue once shown is a shield against defects. That identity can be built through isolated actions. But identity does not freeze, it moves. And the more tied to past goodness, the easier it is to ignore the present contradiction. Moral license does not only apply to individuals. It extends through systems. A company launches a diversity initiative, then ignores complaints for the next 3 years. They point to the campaign, the photos, the donation. They say, look what we have done. And what they did becomes an excuse for what they now refuse to do. A politician makes an ethical decision once, and it becomes his alibi forever. Each vote after that, each silence, each concession is defended by the halo of that moment. They did not earn trust, they borrow it. A person says the right thing in public, but acts differently in private. When asked, they point to the statement, the charity, the platform. They say, I have shown which side I am on, but where you are is not where you are. Not anymore. Because moral license is not about what is real. It is about what is remembered. It is about self-image, about reputation, about protecting the story, not the substance. The more public your good deed is, the stronger the license. Not because the act in itself was bigger, but because the social feedback was stronger. Praise acts as an insulator. The more applause you receive, the more protected you feel from scrutiny. Not because you have earned immunity, but because the applause gave you a moral receipt. The receipt says you're one of the good ones. But receipts cannot replace responsibility. Moral license appears in the smallest habits. You meditate in the morning, then treat people badly in traffic. You say something supportive to a friend, then gossip about another person. You resist a purchase, then overspend later. Think, I did the hard thing before, so this is okay. But this is not balance. It is narrative management. You create a mental account. You add points for each good deed, and when the balance seems high, you start making withdrawals. But the problem is that the account is not real. There is no moral currency, no ledger that turns discipline into permission. It is a trick of the mind and grows with pride. The more you identify as a good person, the easier it is to justify bad decisions, because good people do not do harm. So if you do harm, it should not count. It must be something small. It must be someone else's fault. The stronger your need to see yourself as moral, the more creative your justifications become. So you divide yourself. You keep the parts of yourself that look good in the light and hide the rest behind rationalization. You exaggerate the good, minimize the bad, and call it honesty. But that is not honesty. It is control of a story. And over time, the gap grows wider. You say all the right things. You do just enough to keep up the image. But the core softens. Your standards deviate. Not because you are malicious, but because you have convinced yourself that your past makes your present immune. So how to stop? You stop using morality as a transaction. You stop thinking about balances. You stop saying, I did this so I could do that. You stop acting with kindness as if it were a receipt for future convenience. You begin to see character as a system, not a moment, as a pattern, not a highlight. You demand the same level of yourself when no one is watching, especially then. You don't wait for applause to do the right thing. And you don't use applause to buy your way out of reflection. You keep track of your motives, asking, why am I doing this? What do I think it brings me? You recognize the urge to spend your kindness as if it were credit, and you resist it. You remember that an act of kindness does not cancel the cruelty that follows. That moment of honesty does not erase the lies. That single just action does not neutralize a habit of silence. You build coherence, not currency. You distrust your own praise. You're not afraid to be good. You fear using kindness as camouflage because that is what moral license really is. Camouflaging is a way of disappearing behind your virtue. But the truth does not care about your moral history. It cares about what you are doing now. You're offered choice. The situation is risky. The future is uncertain. The numbers are on the table, but they feel cold and distant. Then someone rethinks it. They highlight the part that's guaranteed. The safe zone, the part you can have in your hand. Suddenly, the decision becomes easy. Not because the odds have changed, but because the way they were presented made the risk seem invisible. That is the effect of pseudo-certainty. The tendency to favor certain results over probabilistic ones when the problem is posed in terms of gains, and to favor risk when the problem is posed in terms of losses. Your brain is evaluating data, is reacting to how it feels when it is enveloped in certainty. Wait, choose this option, and you will save 200 lives for sure. Or choose another, and there is a 33% chance of saving all 600 lives and a 67% of saving none. Most people choose the safe 200. Now rethink it. If you choose this option, 400 people will die for sure. If you choose that one, there's a 33% chance that no one will die and a 67% that all 600 will die. Now, most people choose to take a risk. The same mathematics, the same results, but the way it is presented changes your brain from caution to risk, and vice versa. You don't want to lose what you think you already have. You prefer to protect the sure gain than risk for a better one. But when the frame changes and certainty becomes a guaranteed loss, suddenly risk seems safer than loss. You think you're being rational, but you are carried away by the surface, not by the bottom. This happens everywhere. They offer you a refund or the possibility of obtaining a credit in the store that could be greater. You accept a refund. They offer a guaranteed raise or a possible promotion that might not happen. You accept the raise. But then, when the conversation is about the cost, the loss, that something escapes you, you start to roll the dice. You invest in risky options to avoid a certain fall. You jump without calculating just to avoid facing a definitive decline. It is not logic, but presentation. And the sellers know this. The politicians know this. The systems know this. They create options to make you feel safe or desperate, depending on the result they want you to choose. They offer guarantees when they want you to stay. They describe losses when they want you to jump. They don't change your values. They change your emotional state. And the mathematics continue. The effect runs deeper than decision-making. It reveals something about control. You cling to certainty even when it is objectively worse. Because certainty feels like control, like security, like something you can point to and say, I know this. But control can seem an illusion. And the price of pursuing it is often suboptimal options that seem safer than they are. In medical decisions, people choose guaranteed partial treatments instead of probable complete ones, even if the probabilities favor the latter. In business, executives choose small guaranteed gains instead of riskier investments with higher expected returns. In everyday life, you choose what you have done before, not because it is best, but because it does not ask you to delve into ambiguity. And when the loss side comes into play, the whole personality turns upside down. People become players, but not brave ones, but people preyed on by panic. They jump from one possibility to another, hoping to escape a sure blow. They take unnecessary risks because certainty has become a threat instead of a promise. And the brain, fearful of losing, becomes reckless. The pseudo-certainty effect works because the brain seeks emotional comfort over logical clarity. It prefers a story that it can cling to over a probability that it cannot feel. It wants to avoid regret more than to maximize the result. And once the illusion of certainty is presented, even if hollow, the mind clings to it. So how do you combat it? Strip the frame. Look at the mathematics. Write down the expected value. Ask, if these were only numbers, not words, what would I choose? Train to tolerate ambiguity, to sit with risk without needing to reshape it into false clarity. You realize when someone presents a choice as certain and ask, what are they not saying? What is behind the guarantee? What is the real structure of this decision? Not the way they're drawing it for me. You accept that there is no truly safe path. Each option has a cost. Each certainty has a hidden compensation. And the choice is not between safety and danger. It is between one type of uncertainty and another. You make decisions based on structure, not on sensations. You remind yourself that a sure failure is not the same as an intelligent decision, and you stop trusting the framework, because the framework is never neutral. It is a tool. Sometimes it clarifies, but more often, it sells. You listen to an argument. The logic is flawed, the reasoning does not hold, and the structure does not hold, but you agree with the conclusion, so you let it pass. You nod, you accept it, not because the path makes sense, but because you like where it ends. That is the belief bias, the tendency to judge the strength of an argument based on the credibility of its conclusion, rather than the validity of its logic. If you already agree, the reasoning doesn't matter. If you do not agree, no logic suffices. You are not following the chain. You are jumping to the final point. If it feels true, you say it is. You call it insight, but it is just alignment. It feels good because it matches what you already believe. And when beliefs are confirmed, you stop checking calculations. You read something online. The argument is weak. The statistics are selective. The conclusion is bold, but you nod because it fits your narrative, because it feels like something you have said before. You do not question the method. You accept the result because the result is yours. Belief bias reverses the function of reason. Normally, you examine the evidence, follow the logic, and reach a conclusion. But the bias reverses it. You start with the conclusion, then look for logic to support it. Then you praise the logic, not because it is solid, but because it has given you what you wanted. You think you are being rational, but you are being loyal to familiarity, not truth. The brain prefers consistency over correction. If a statement fits what is already in your mental world, it is welcome without inspection. But if it challenges that world, it stops at the door. You do not test the logic, you test the fit. And if the fit is incorrect, you call it false. Even if it is true, even if the logic is perfect, even if the data is real. Belief bias not only blocks new ideas, but reinforces bad ones. It allows lazy arguments to survive because they say the right thing. You repeat them, you share them, and you defend them. You say things like it is common sense, obviously, or we all know it, but those words are shields, not for logic, but for belief. You see it in politics. People reject the well-structured arguments of the other side, however solid they may be. They accept their own contradictions as long as the punchline seems right to them. It is not about facts, it is about tribes. Beliefs become badges, and logic becomes decoration. You see it in religion, in identity, in moral debates. People accept erroneous arguments if they fit their vision of the world. They discard irrefutable reasoning if it threatens the image they have of themselves or their values. Not because they're dishonest, but because the discomfort of disagreement is harder to bear than the cost of being wrong. And the smarter you are, the worse it is, because intelligence becomes a tool for reinforcement. You become better at rationalizing, better at defending, better at disguising belief as reason. You build stronger walls, not better windows. So how do you break it? The order is reversed. Structure is evaluated before feeling. Questions: if I dislike this conclusion, would I still accept the path to it? If someone I disagree with said this, would I still think it logical? You isolate the argument from the person, the party, and the echo chamber. You test your own comfort. If you feel a surge of agreement, pause. You ask yourself, why do I like this? Is it because it is true or because it feels familiar? You develop tolerance for disagreement. Study logic like a mechanic studies engines, not because you like how it sounds, but because you want to know when something breaks. Make a habit of looking for arguments that disturb you, not to destroy them, but to understand why they make you retreat. You stop using belief as a shortcut to truth, because belief is not proof, and truth does not ask for comfort. It asks for your attention. And the bias of beliefs is what happens when you stop paying it attention. You assume that the future you will want what you want now. You assume that your state of mind, preferences, needs, priorities will stay the same. You plan, predict, commit based not on what will be true, but on what seems true now. That is projection bias. The cognitive error of overestimating how much your current state reflects your future state. You project the present into the future as if it were a fixed shadow, but the future does not stand still, and neither do you. You go to buy food hungry, and you buy too much. You imagine yourself enjoying the gym every morning at 6 a.m. because you feel motivated right now. You sign up for something, an event, a trip, or a meeting in 3 months, assuming that you will be just as enthusiastic in the future. But when the day comes, your mind is elsewhere. The you that made the plan is not the one who has to fulfill it. You don't plan for who you will be. You plan for who you are. But who you are is a moving target. Your emotions change. Your energy changes. Your context changes. But your mind fixes on the present and copies it forward. It says, I feel like this, so I will feel like this. That assumption distorts everything. You make commitments that don't fit. You set goals that do not reflect your rhythm. You make promises that become burdens. You optimize yourself for a version of yourself that no longer exists. And when you can't keep up, you feel like a failure. But you have not failed. You have simply mispredicted the shape of your own change. Projection bias makes you impatient. You can't imagine wanting something else later, so you want it now. You make long-term decisions for short-term desires. You pursue things that feel good at the moment and assume that satisfaction will last. You eat as if this version of you is permanent. You spend as if this version of you will always earn more. You choose as if time did not stretch. And it's not just about preferences. It's about values. You assume that your priorities will stay the same. You say, I will always want this kind of work. This kind of success will always matter to me. I will always believe that this is the right thing. But the years pass, the seasons change, the experiences accumulate, and you look back at the promises made by a stranger who looked like you. The projection bias is not an illusion. It is compression. The mind flattens time. It takes the complexity of personal evolution and reduces it to a snapshot. And that snapshot becomes your forecast, but no snapshot can contain the truth of change. You see it in relationships. You commit to a version of connection that made sense in a particular emotional season. But later your needs change, your rhythms change, your capacity changes, and you feel distant. Not because the bond was false, but because the context evolved and the plan did not. You see in the projects. You start something new with a great vision. You imagine that your future self will maintain the same impulse, the same clarity, but the project ripens, and so do you. And now the enthusiasm has faded, but the commitment remains. You keep going out of obligation, not alignment. You finish not because it still matters, but because you once thought it would. You see in the planning. You build your year around routines that seem appropriate in January. You write down goals with a mentality that will not survive the first difficult month. You structure your time based on an idealized version of your own coherence. And when that version does not appear, you blame yourself, not the distortion that made the plan. So how do you counteract it? You start by questioning your confidence. You treat emotional predictions as unreliable data. You say, this seems true now, but how will I feel later? You leave space for fluctuation. You don't expect your future self to be a clone. You respect his autonomy. You plan with change, not against it. You create flexibility. You don't overload yourself. You don't overcommit. You leave room to adapt. You recognize that a perfect plan for today can become a trap tomorrow, and you prefer to correct the course before collapsing under the rigidity. Study your past. Ask yourself, What did I think I wanted a year ago? What did I expect to enjoy? What did I assume would satisfy me? And when the answers do not match reality, you stop treating your current state as permanent truth. You improve at detecting temporary hunger by listening to the difference between impulse and principle, between mood and value, between right now and always. You forgive yourself for changing, and you stop expecting consistency from a system built to evolve because you're not fixed. You're not static. You are not what you feel at this moment. You are a trajectory, and the person you are becoming deserves the freedom to disagree with the person you are today. Someone tells you what to do. It is reasonable. It is correct. It could even be something that you already agree with. But now that they are imposing it on you, something shifts. You get tense. You resist. You feel the need to do the opposite. Not because you disagree, but because you feel controlled. That is reactance. The psychological resistance that arises when your freedom to choose is threatened. Even if the suggestion is correct, the pressure makes it wrong. It does not begin with logic. It begins with friction. The moment someone says you must, you have to, it is necessary, your autonomy trembles. A silent alarm sounds, not against the action itself, but against the feeling of being pigeonholed. You do not listen to the message, you listen to the structure. And the structure says that you have no control. So you resist, sometimes with words, sometimes in silence, sometimes only in your way of thinking. You become skeptical. You look for defects. You build counterarguments, not to find the truth, but to recover agency, to remind yourself, I choose. Reactance does not need a bad message to ignite. It needs the wrong tone, the wrong posture, the wrong implication. The feeling that your mind, your will, your direction are being hijacked. And the stronger the force, the stronger the recoil. You see it in children. The moment you demand that they resist. Not because they do not want to comply, but because the approach takes away the idea that they have a voice, and they will say no just to prove that they have it. But adults do not overcome this. They only disguise it. You see in politics, a policy can be rational, even beneficial. But if it feels imposed, if it comes from the other side, if it sounds condescending, if it feels forced, people rebel. They do not weigh the consequences. They protect freedom or the illusion of it. You see it in relationships. One member of the couple tries to help, suggests, pressures, and even if he is right, the other moves away, not because he rejects the advice, but because he wants to keep his autonomy intact. And autonomy, once challenged, becomes more important than the result. You see it in health. A doctor gives orders, a campaign says what you should do, a father demands a change, and suddenly, what made sense becomes something to be challenged. The voice of reason sounds like a threat, and the reaction is not towards health, but towards independence. Reactance is not about what is asked, but about how it arises. It arises when people feel that they are being pushed out of their own center. When the voice of another person threatens to replace theirs. When the choice seems like an illusion. And the paradox is evident. The more important the message, the more dangerous the pressure. The more you push, the more they resist. Not because you are wrong, but because you speak loudly, and the volume can sound like domination. So how do you avoid it? You soften. You invite. You frame things in ways that preserve agency. You don't say that you have to do it. You say that you could do it. You don't say that you are wrong. You say, have you even thought about it? You let people maintain their sovereignty, even when they are heading in the wrong direction. You give space because space is where thought lives. You let people move, not just obey. You give them space to reach their own conclusion, because a conclusion that you reach yourself is yours. And ownership makes change sustainable. You also observe it in yourself. You capture the reflection, the resistance that arises when someone offers truth too bluntly. You ask, am I really disagreeing, or do I just feel trapped? Is the problem the idea, or the way it has been expressed? And when you discover that the idea was correct, you accept it even if the tone was inappropriate. Because freedom does not mean rejecting good advice. It means choosing when and how to accept it. Reactance has nothing to do with truth. It has to do with territory, mental territory. And when people feel that space is being invaded, they defend themselves, even if the invader is reason. You don't argue with them until you reach an agreement. You let them arrive, because nobody likes to be dragged, not even toward the correct answer. You sit down to make a decision. You want clarity. You want confidence. So you look for data. You compare. You investigate. You collect opinions. You open tabs. You read reviews. You think that more information will bring more certainty. But it is not like that. Instead, clarity blurs. The options multiply. The signal is buried under the noise. You scroll not because you're closer to an answer, but because you cannot stop. That is information overload. The cognitive paralysis that occurs when the mind is flooded with more information than it can process. More data, less clarity. You think that knowledge is power. That more data leads to better choices. That reading more leads to better results. But your brain is not designed for infinite intake. It does not scale elegantly. It drowns. It freezes. It blocks. Because the decision-making process is not just about collecting, but about filtering. And the more you collect without filtering, the more you collapse under the weight of your search. You try to buy something, a laptop, a microphone, or a mattress. At first, it seems simple, but you keep investigating. Each review contradicts its predecessor. Each characteristic becomes essential. Each detail becomes a reason to break the deal. You start to imagine that you will regret your choice. You are not delayed because you are indecisive, but because you are saturated. You want to learn something new, a skill, a topic, a language. You collect resources. You mark guides. You download PDFs. You subscribe to 10 channels, but you never start. Because starting seems like choosing, and choosing seems like closing the door to other options. So you keep collecting. You confuse preparation with progress. You accumulate knowledge instead of using it. You make a plan, a life change, a goal. You read books, watch testimonies, compare methodologies. But the more you consume, the less sure you are. One expert contradicts another. One path conflicts with the rest. And instead of acting, you keep looking for certainties. But certainty never comes because information never ends. The more you try to feel safe through facts, the more fragile you become when facing choice. Because each new piece of data adds friction, adds a what if, and adds complexity. And instead of clarifying, information becomes its own form of noise. You no longer trust your instincts. You expect proof, but the proof never comes clean. You assume that the next article, the next video, the next comment will be the one that gives you the perfect decision. But perfection is a mirage, and the search for it through data is a trap. Information overload doesn't just slow you down. It makes you anxious. It makes you feel as if the truth is just out of your reach. It makes you feel as if you are one source away from confidence. But confidence does not come from data. It comes from direction. You don't need more input. You need a framework. Because without a framework, the input is chaos. It spills everywhere. It overwhelms you and, in the end, drowns what you were trying to build. You think you're being thorough, but you're stagnating. You think you're being smart, but you're avoiding the discomfort of commitment because committing means choosing, and choosing means ignoring some options. And ignoring options seems like a risk. So you keep looking. But what you're really looking for is not more information. You're looking for permission. Permission to start. Permission to stop investigating. Permission to act with incomplete knowledge. And that permission will not come from outside. It comes from arriving at the point where you say enough is enough. You decide what matters. You define the question. You eliminate the options. You stop consuming and start distilling. You look at the sea of data and choose which drops belong to you. You close the tabs that are left over. You let the silence come in again. You move because clarity does not come from saturation. It comes from subtraction. You listen to a story. It is vivid, detailed, specific. It feels real. It attracts you. And then someone gives you statistics, the basic rates, the real probabilities, but they feel flat, distant, irrelevant. You ignore them. Not on purpose, not openly. But you forget that they matter. You trust the story. That is basic base rate neglect. Negligence. The tendency to ignore general statistical information in favor of specific individual examples. Your brain prefers details to data. Believe in what is vivid. not in what is probable. They tell you that there is a 1% chance of something happening. Then you find out that it has happened to someone. You read about their experience. You see their face. And now that 1% seems like a guarantee. You think, if it has happened to them, it can happen to me. And the probability disappears because the mind does not measure truth with numbers. It measures it with narratives. You make a decision. You know the statistics. You have seen the graph. But then someone tells you a personal story. A friend who was successful. A person who failed, and now you can't stop seeing it. The data take a back seat. The anecdote is everything. You act based on a case because a case seems real. But reality is in the rate. It appears in medicine. They tell you that a treatment has a 95% success rate, but your neighbor tried it and got worse. You ignore the 95%. You think it could be you. You transfer your trust from the population to the person, from the trend to the exception. It appears in finance. You are warned about risky investments. The numbers are clear, but then you hear about a person who got rich. You pursue the result, not probabilities. You forget the thousands who lost because you don't see them. You only see the one that shines. It appears out of fear. You read about a rare crime, strange accident, tragedy with low probability, but it stays engraved in your mind. It feels near. You change your behavior. You increase your control, not because of the probability, but because of an unforgettable, shocking story. You think you are cautious, but you are distorted, because your brain is not built to process base rates. It is built to process patterns. And patterns made of people feel more urgent than patterns made of mathematics. So you make decisions on unstable ground. You ignore statistical reality and follow the emotional one. You prepare for exceptions instead of planning for the norms. And the cost is a constant distortion, a constant anxiety, a constant surprise when things don't turn out as your only vivid story predicted. Disregarding the base rate also makes you overconfident. You start a business and ignore failure rates because someone else did it, was successful, and you see their face. You read their book. You see their interview. You think that if they did it, you can too. But you never met the hundreds who didn't. You never heard their version because they were not visible. They didn't leave a story. So your expectations become fiction, and your disappointment becomes inevitable. It's not about being cynical. It's about being calibrated. Because base rates are not opinions. They're structure. They tell you how the world behaves over time. And if you ignore it, you not only miss the truth, but your goal. So how do you fix it? Start by asking yourself, what is the base rate? Before deciding, reacting, or planning, ask, how often does this really happen? Don't skip the story. Start with the pattern. Distrust atypical cases, not because they are lies, but because they're noisy. They demand your attention, but they don't deserve your decisions. Place the statistics and focus in your mind, not just on one side. Don't let the vivid drown out the valid. You listen to the stories, but then check their weight. You don't treat a single case as forecast. You treat it as an illustration. And when someone says, I know someone who, you say, I believe you. But you keep checking the numbers. Because the truth is in the trend. And the rare should not define the real. Ignoring the base rate is comforting. It gives you heroes. It gives you exceptions. But living from exceptions makes your life more difficult than necessary. You want to beat the odds, but first you have to know them. You look at the winners, at the survivors, at the visible ones. Study their habits, their paths, their advice. You think, this is what success looks like. You imitate them. You follow their steps. You analyze their movements. But what you don't see, what nobody shows you, are all the others. The silent majority that followed the same path and failed. Those who didn't make it. Those who weren't interviewed. Those who don't have books, blogs, or biographies. That is survival bias. The tendency to focus on successful cases and ignore failures, which leads to distorted conclusions and false patterns. You look at the entrepreneur who built a billion-dollar company in a garage. You read his rules, his morning routine, his risky decisions, and you think that that is the model to follow. But what about the other 100 who did the same and disappeared, who got up early, worked late, sacrificed everything, and ended up in debt, in anonymity, in silence? Nothing is known about them, not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer there. And absence does not make them irrelevant. It makes them invisible. Study the writer who triumphed without formal training, the actor who was discovered serving tables, the student who dropped out and changed the world. And you build myths. You say they followed their passion, that they didn't give up, that they trusted their instinct. But so did thousands of other people. You simply don't know their names. Success stories don't tell you what works. They tell you what worked once. And that is not the same. Survival bias filters reality. It hides the base rate. It hides the probabilities. It creates the illusion that effort always leads to reward, that talent always rises to the top, that good decisions are always successful. But the system does not reward everyone equally, and not all results are under your control. You see in war, the army used to study the planes that returned to find where they were most damaged. The plan was to reinforce those points, but someone realized that we were only seeing the planes that returned. Those who did not return were hit elsewhere. Reinforcing visible damage would have protected the wrong places. That is the lesson. If you only study the survivors, you are learning from incomplete data. You are fixing what is not broken. You are ignoring where the system really fails. The same goes for professional careers. You analyze the best, the 1%, and you ask yourself, what are they doing right? But you rarely ask yourself how many others did the same and were not successful. You build strategies based on the highlights, but success is often the result of factors such as timing, environment, resources, and chance, which do not appear in the story. You build businesses based on success stories. You say, these companies did X, so we will do X. But you don't study those that did X and failed because they didn't leave a plan. They left silence. Survival bias creates false hopes. It makes you overestimate the probability of success. It makes you blame yourself when you don't reach your goals, because if they did it, why can't you? You forget that for every survivor, there are countless others who are just as good, just as disciplined, just as hungry, and still failed. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It means you shouldn't confuse visibility with validation. The fact that something is common among winners does not mean that it caused the victory. The fact that someone has been successful doing something does not mean that guarantees success. Then, how do you avoid a trap? You ask for missing data. You ask, who didn't achieve it? What did they do? What were the probabilities? You don't study only success. Study failure, not to be pessimistic, but precise. Don't select tests that support what feels good. Weigh what is not seen, what is not heard, and the invisible stories that balance the scale. Remember that the road to success is full of people who seemed like winners until they weren't. And that doesn't make the trip unworthy. It makes it real. The survival bias wants you to think there is a formula, but there isn't. There's only a range. And within that range, the result isn't always equal to merit. Sometimes, the best you can do is not follow the winner. It is to understand a system and walk with your eyes open. You have a choice. The facts are clear. The numbers don't change. But depending on how information is presented, your decision changes. The same data, but in a different framework. One version seems optimistic. The other seems dangerous. And your judgment follows feeling, not facts. That is the framing effect. The cognitive bias by which people react differently to the same information depending on how it's presented. The truth remains the same, but perception doesn't. They tell you that a procedure has 90% survival. You feel safe. You nod your head. It sounds safe. But if you tell someone else that the same procedure has a 10% mortality, they will hesitate. They will feel fear. They will leave. The numbers are identical, but the framing changes meaning. Not mathematically, but emotionally. You see it in headlines. A news story says that unemployment falls to 6%. Another says that 1 in 16 adults cannot find work. The same statistic, but with a different effect. One is progress. The other is crisis, and public opinion leans accordingly. It works in everyday decisions. The label on a yogurt says 90% fat-free, and you feel healthy, but another brand says it contains 10% fat, and you pass it by. You are not comparing content. You are reacting to framing. And the more emotional the topic, the stronger the effect. People are more supportive of organ donation when it is presented as an option that must be rejected rather than an option that must be accepted. People donate more when they are told how many people benefit, not how many continue to suffer. You think you are choosing based on logic, but you are choosing based on lens. The framing effect needs no lies to deceive. It only needs selection, a certain angle, a chosen emphasis, the omission of a word, the presence of another, the subtle turn that takes you from a conclusion to its opposite without changing the core. You are not evaluating reality, but the context. You don't just ask what is true. You feel how it feels. And feelings often prevail over the calculation. You make a plan. You say to yourself, I have already dedicated 3 hours to this, so I'm going to continue even though leaving it would save me more time. You frame it as an investment, not a waste. But that frame keeps you stuck. You refuse to lose what you have already lost, so you lose more. You choose between two options. One is framed as gaining security, the other as avoiding a loss. You know that they are structurally identical, but avoiding loss seems safer, so you choose it. Not because you have done the calculations, but because the words have guided feeling. This bias not only distorts judgment, but distorts morality. The way a problem is described changes what you consider ethical. Call it collateral damage, and people justify it. Call it killing civilians, and people resist. The frame dictates what you tolerate. And the scariest thing is that you rarely realize it. You assume that your reaction is objective. You say, I'm only responding to the facts. But it is not like that. You are responding to the wrapper, and the wrapper was chosen for you. So, how do you defend yourself? You restructure the frame. You say, what if this were worded differently? What is the inverse of this statement? What are they not showing me? You translate the numbers into positive and negative terms before deciding. You force symmetry. You refuse to let language choose for you. You develop the habit of changing perspective. You ask yourself, if I heard the opposite, would I still feel the same? You stop when something seems too obvious, because the obvious is usually a sign of good framing, not good reasoning. And you extend this to the way of speaking. You learn to frame carefully, to guide without manipulating, to offer both sides honestly. Because the truth is not in the label, it is in the structure. And when you ignore the frame, you finally see the shape underneath. You don't stop trying because you are weak. You stop trying because nothing changed when you did. You stop trying because the effort became noise. The feedback became silence. Hope became weight. This is not a failure. It is learned helplessness, a state in which your nervous system concludes that action is irrelevant, that the fight does not lead to any result. That behavior does not change the consequences. Not because you never can, but because once you didn't. And the mind remembers that pattern more deeply than almost anything. You start with initiative. You start with belief. You request things. You ask for things. You try to fix things. But over time, if your actions meet with randomness, with punishment, with indifference, your internal system is updated. Learn the rule. Nothing works, so it stops. Not loudly or dramatically, but silently. You keep making the movements. You keep doing the minimum. You keep maintaining appearances. But the internal gear that makes you try breaks, and no one sees it happen. Start little by little. You suggest an idea. It is rejected. You express a feeling. It is ignored. You take initiative. Punished. You make yourself vulnerable. They make fun of you. The lesson is written in your entrails. Don't move. Don't talk. Don't take risks. You keep thinking about change, but no longer believe it. The future shrinks, not because you fear it, but because you believe it won't respond. That is the form of impotence. It doesn't always look like despair. Sometimes it looks like silence, like passivity, like stillness that used to be movement, like monotony that used to be hunger. And the world often confuses it with laziness, weakness, apathy. But what is really happening runs deeper. Your brain has simply stopped associating effort and possibility. It has rewritten cause and effect. This was first studied in animals. Dogs exposed to uncontrollable pain, shocks from which they could not escape. Over time, they stopped trying to escape. Even when escape became possible, they simply stayed there, not because they enjoyed it, not because they wanted it, but because they had learned that the result did not depend on them. That's the scary part. The barrier had disappeared, but the mind didn't believe it. And what is true for dogs under laboratory lights is true for people under pressure. If your life has been full of arbitrary punishments, unpredictable rejection, or constant failures, you don't just carry wounds. You carry an internalized map that says there's no way out. This manifests in education. A student repeatedly told he is stupid, or who sees others succeed while he fails, begins to disconnect. Not because he doesn't want to learn, but because he's learned that trying is useless. Even when a good teacher arrives, even when support is finally given to them, the internal rule remains: stay quiet, don't take risks. It's safer to fail passively than to try and fail again. This is noticeable at work, too. You suggest ideas, but they're always rejected. You work hard, but promotions never come. You ask for opinions and receive nothing back. Over time, you stop offering, stop trying. You call it exhaustion, but it's often something colder: impotence in a bubble. It shows in relationships, too. You try to fix things, communicate, grow, but patterns don't change. The other person doesn't find you, so you stop trying. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop believing that caring will lead to something new. It manifests as depression. You feel bad. You try to feel better. Sleep more. Eat better. Exercise, but the fog does not dissipate. You do it again. Nothing changes. So the effort dies. Not because you don't want to heal, but because you've learned that healing may not be within your reach. The most dangerous thing is how rational it seems. It doesn't look like despair at all. It looks like realism. You say, that's how things are. You no longer expect an answer. You no longer believe in cause and effect. You let yourself go. You obey. You sit in the waiting room of your own life, and you forget what it felt like to move, not because you want to forget it, but because remembering hurts, because remembering reminds you of a time when you still believe that the world was poorer without your action, and when it was not like that. The belief collapsed. This state is not permanent. But it seems like it is. That is its most brutal trick. It convinces you that impotence is yours, that it is your fault, that it is your nature, when in reality it was installed, trained, and reinforced. Your brain did not fail. It adapted. It did what it thought would protect you. It taught you to conserve energy, to avoid disappointment, to numb hope. And now, to awaken it, something dangerous is required. It requires risk. So how to start again? You don't demand a leap. You don't pretend to believe. You don't pretend optimism. You start with friction. Small, low-risk acts. You take measures that are too insignificant to fear, too fast to hate, too small. Oh, activate the voice that says it won't matter. And then you look carefully, not in search of dramatic changes, but for feedback, for movement, for anything that shows that the system is no longer dead. You write a sentence, you take a walk, you send a message, you make a decision that contradicts the frozen rule, and then you wait. You don't expect joy, you expect a signal. You ask, did something respond to this? You let your nervous system relearn the link between action and result. You treat your life as an experiment, not as a referendum on your worth. Because learned helplessness does not undo itself with motivation. It undoes itself with data. Repeated, soft, and honest data that show that the world can be different. Now you surround yourself with people who do not demand energy from you, who do not tell you to try harder, who do not interpret your stillness as a challenge. You need people who understand the cost of movement, who sit with you while your hands tremble towards a doorknob, who do not ask you for transformation, only contact, people who know that impotence is not a state of mind. It is a map, and maps can be redrawn. You rebuild your agency little by little. You let go of shame. You stop calling yourself lazy. You stop labeling yourself as broken. You say, I've been shaped by experiences that have taught me to stand still. But stillness is not my destiny. Stillness is just a page, and I am allowed to turn it slowly, silently, without fanfare, even if no one sees it. You learn to distrust the feeling that says, why bother? Not because it is irrational, but because it was trained by old patterns, and patterns can lie, especially those carved in pain. You remember that the dogs in that first study, when they were finally shown the door, were still lying down. But when they were gently guided through it again and again, something changed. They recovered the movement. Their instincts reconnected. They began to move on their own. Not all at once, but enough. You're not helpless. They only taught you that trying hurts. You're not broken. They only showed you too many closed doors. You're not desperate. They only trained you to expect silence. But silence is broken and doors open. And even the heaviest stillness can eventually change when someone somewhere says that this is not the end, and you believe them, even if it is a little. Even if it costs you everything you have. That is where it starts again. You feel nervous. You feel guilty. You feel joy. And you assume that everyone else can notice it. You think that it is written on your face, encoded in your voice, seeping through every gesture. You believe that your emotions are obviously visible, exposed, but they are not. Others do not see what you feel. They do not hear your thoughts. They do not decipher your silence. That is the illusion of transparency. The bias that makes you believe that your internal states are more visible than they really are. You feel like glass, but you are steel. You think they know it, but they guess it. And most of the time they are wrong. You make a mistake in public and your ears burn. You imagine that everyone has noticed. You assume that they have seen the stumble, the hesitation, the wrong word. You repeat it later, convinced that others are also repeating it. But it isn't like that. They have moved on to something else, or they never saw it in the first place. Because people don't stare as much as you think. They look at themselves. They are trapped in their illusion, like you. You speak in a group and feel your voice tremble. You are sure that they hear it. You see that your hands tremble and imagine that the spotlights get closer. But then someone tells you that you seemed sure, and you don't understand it because what you felt and what they saw were different realities. You felt transparent, but you weren't. The illusion of transparency works both ways. You overestimate how clearly others can read you, and you overestimate how clearly you can read others. You think that you know what they are thinking, that their silence means judgment, that their brief answer means rejection, that their pause means disappointment, but often it means nothing or something that you never considered, but your brain fills the silence with doubts about yourself. Assume their mind is an extension of yours, that your insecurity is reflected, that your anxiety is mutual, but most of the time it isn't. You try to hide emotions. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not. You think the lie is obvious. Your face betrays you. They're going to see you coming. But it isn't like that. They take you literally because they aren't scanning you for micro-expressions. They are reacting to your words. And even if they suspect something deeper, they don't always trust that instinct because they have their own doubts, their own filters, their own fears. You think that your guilt shines, that your shame is reflected in your skin, that your mistakes are transmitted to the whole room. So you make yourself smaller. You overcompensate. You apologize for things no one noticed. You try to correct something that has not been seen because you think they read you like a book, but most people have not even opened the cover yet. This illusion isn't only social. It affects your decisions. You avoid asking for what you need because you take it for granted that it is obvious. You wait for them to help because you think your struggle is visible. You hope someone intervenes because your pain is very strong. But nobody comes. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know, because you haven't said it, because they can't see inside. And you suffer twice. Once for the pain, and again for the loneliness of believing others can see it and choose not to act. We act for others without realizing it. We model our behavior based on how we think they perceive us. We censor ourselves. We adjust our tone. We edit our reactions. But we do it for an audience that may not be watching, or that is doing it from the wrong angle. And the price is that we begin to live a life destined to manage perception without checking if perception has existed. The illusion makes you think too much, explain too much, overreact. You try to control how others see you, not by asking, but by guessing, and guesses are rarely kind. You assume that you have offended them, that you have bored them, that you have crossed a line, but they may have been distracted, tired, lost in their own script. You assume that your clumsiness is a scream, but they have not heard anything. This illusion traps you in shyness. It makes you shrink in social situations. It makes you stand paralyzed before crowds. It makes you whisper when you should speak, not because you don't know what to say, but because you think your discomfort is contaminating the air. But it isn't like that. It is contained. It is yours, and smaller than you think. Then how do you break this illusion? You start by trusting feedback more than fear. You listen to what people say, not what you think they mean. You test your beliefs. You ask questions. You say, have I sounded too harsh? Has it sounded strange? Has it been okay? And often you will discover that your internal storm was never visible. You learn to tolerate ambiguity, to accept that you do not know how others see you, and that is okay. That their minds are not your responsibility, that your job is not to micromanage the impression, but to live honestly. You grant others the same benefit. You do not assume that their silence means hate. You do not interpret their expression as rejection. You ask, clarify, and let people speak for themselves instead of projecting your fear onto their face. You stop waiting for people to read your pain. You express it. You say what hurts you, what you need, what you fear. Because if you wait for them to realize, you will keep waiting. Not because they do not care, but because they cannot see what you have never shared. You forgive yourself for being messy, unclear, and human. You stop trying to heal yourself in transparency. Because even when you try to be perfect, they will still see what they want to see. And sometimes they will not see anything. The illusion of transparency does not mean that you are exposed. It means that you are human. And humanity is never as visible as it feels. Generated with https://com AI.